Welcome back, everybody. Before we get into this, let's go right into the business side of the house. This episode is brought to you by Black Rifle Coffee. Let's head over to their website right now. Ooh, Field Ethos and BRCC, the Dangerous Game Specialty Collab Roast. That looks like it's available to everybody. Oftentimes there's the ECS, which you have to join, Evan's Coffee subscription. This one looks like it's just a straight-up collab. Yeah, with a hunter that happens to be a skeleton being run down by I'm going to call that a water buffalo? I have no idea. Normal website below that, light coffee to dark. Looks like Murdered Out Roast is the darkest of the dark. And what do we have on the lightest? Silencer Smooth, which is actually what we use at the coffee shop as our espresso based. It's quite delightful. Let's click on the apparel. Let's see if they have anything new here for right now. Oh, yeah, some long sleeve shirts, short sleeve shirts, the Tactisquatch. We actually have a Montana-specific Tactisquatch for up here in Kalispell if you happen to visit. So you can check out all of that stuff on the website. They have a bunch of gear, coffee bundles, coffee sampler, bestsellers. I said this last time, these company logo diner mugs, these are like a classic 1950s diner mug. One of my favorites. I was actually drinking coffee out of it this morning. Here's the bottom line. If you like an awesome brand that supports veterans and their initiatives, founded by veterans, and you like amazing coffee, if you like an amazing brand and amazing coffee, then look no further than blackriflecoffee.com. And that's it on the business side of the house. I have 3 guests today, and I was trying to think of the best way to describe this episode, and perhaps the most accurate description is I'm really worried about what our Canadian friends to the north are doing. So my guests today, I have Brian, Fred, and Catherine. Brian and Fred were members of the CAF, the Canadian Armed Forces. They have different stories, and I'm going to let them tell their stories, but their careers both ended due to the COVID vaccine mandate. Specifically, the Canadian Forces were mandating the Moderna vaccine. Catherine is a lawyer that is currently engaged in a lawsuit, and I believe the number she used was 458 people are currently involved, suing the Canadian government for things exactly like what happened with Brian and Fred. There's some wild things going on north of the border, and for people who want to be wildly progressive in the United States, the answers to the test are kind of being displayed up there, whether it's from social programs, everything from cost of housing, unemployment, environmental issues, societal issues, national health care and the quality of health that you are getting up there, restriction of free speech, compelling of speech, let alone what happened during COVID. I'm not from Canada. All 3 of these people are, so I'm going to let them speak for themselves. So let's get into episode number 332 with Brian, Fred, and Catherine. Enjoy.
Okay, got the red smoke. Gun run, north and south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke. Okay, copy, west of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now. Come on with it, baby, give it to me, I need it. You're cleared hot. Copy, cleared hot.
First-time podcaster, you're off and running. Where do you guys want to open?
Great question.
You reached out to me.
Mm-hmm.
We could go intros. You guys just want to go intros? We could work our way into it.
That's easy, yeah.
Frederick, you kick it off. Not in French.
Of course. Hi, first of all, welcome to receiving us here.
Of course.
My name is Frederick. I'm a French-Canadian. I used to be in the Canadian Armed Forces. I have served 4 years, and I like to think that I had a good start in my career, but it ended pretty quickly.
Okay.
And I will share that part later.
Okay.
Catherine Christiansen. I'm a lawyer from Edmonton, Alberta, and I have always represented military and veterans. And in October 2021, I had thousands of military members and veterans reach out to me for help because the Chief of Defense Staff had just introduced a mandate for COVID vaccines.
Did that happen almost overnight?
It did.
Yeah.
It did. In August of 21, he said he would not bring in any type of mandate. And October 8th, he signed the directive saying that there would be a mandate. And the only option at that time presented to our armed forces was Moderna, which had already been discontinued in several countries as being dangerous to exactly the age group of our military members.
How did they get around that? Did they just not even address it?
Yeah, basically. So it's an interesting story because it starts with one chief of defense staff who had been in for about 5 years, General Vance. When vaccines had just been developed, the deputy minister comes into his office and said, you're going to get a 100% vaccination rate to show an example to the Canadian people. First of all, not the role of our military to give any examples. That's not their role.
Maybe like integrity and honor and hard work. You know, I can get behind that.
Yep. So he told
Even
them,
though it falls short in every military.
yeah, exactly. Well, and he's got an interesting history. But anyway, he said, pound sand, you're not doing it. What if there's something wrong with this one vaccine? You're going to wipe out my whole military, and you're not using my people as guinea pigs. I'm not doing it. So they skirted him out on a sexual misconduct allegation.
Interesting.
Yeah. Put Admiral MacDonald in the chair. He's there for a couple of weeks. I have the briefing note, so I know what he was told. And he was told, you can't do this. Legally, medically, morally, ethically, you name it. You cannot bring in a mandate under Canadian law. So he said, pound salt, I'm not doing it. He's out within 3 or 4 weeks on a sexual misconduct allegation.
These just generals and admirals are very frisky, it seems like, in the Canadian
apparently.
forces.
So General Fortin was in charge of the vaccine rollout for Canadian citizens or the public. They told him he's going to do a mandate. And he said, no, I'm not. I can't do it. Sexual misconduct allegation.
At least they're consistent.
At least they are. So they put Wayne Eyre into the chair as acting chief of defense staff. He gets a briefing note, which says exactly the same as Admiral MacDonald's briefing note. Can't do this. No way. It's written by General Trudeau. General Trudeau is then run out of town on a sexual misconduct allegation.
Always the same thing. Right? It's great.
Yeah.
Now, they've
something
pretty much
else.
all been cleared. None of them have ever, any of them that faced charges, they were acquitted, etc. So, so then October 8th comes, Eyre signs the order to bring in a mandate, and he is promoted to full general.
In the same day?
Within a week or two. Very, very close.
Probably coincidental timing.
Just a coincidence.
Yeah. Okay, we have plenty to dig in on that front. Brian?
Yeah, so Brian Isted here, retired a week ago today from the Canadian Armed Forces. I got a medical, what's called a 3B release from the military, served just under 12 years. I'm the one who reached out to you. I'm the reason we're all here, and Frederick's got a really important story to tell, and I've got some interesting experience from my time at CF Incom in 2020 as well, while everything was rolling out, and I'd love to dig in here.
Well, so the intros are great. So 2 previous service members. We have a lawyer that's obviously flooded with requests to support service members. You did, in fact, reach out. Do you want to start with why you wanted to reach out, or do you want to think that maybe Frederick's story could have, his experience leading into that combined with your own? I'm gonna let you guys take the reign.
I think it makes sense for me to give the chronology from 2019, 2020, from what I saw rolling out as it rolled out, as the pandemic unfolded from an intelligence perspective. And then it can be followed up by his experience with the mandate, what happened to me after I was kind of, quote unquote, forced to get my jobs as well as I was going on different courses and whatnot that required it. But I think just for the benefit of the listener, if I can say what I saw happen at work before these events happened, I think it makes more sense.
Fire away, sir.
Okay, so just dialing it back to, we'll go back to October of 2019.
Well, before that, how was your career leading up to that point? Entry, like, where are you from? What brought you to the service?
Okay, fair enough. So, born and raised in suburbs outside Toronto. Spent most of my young life there playing hockey, soccer. Hockey is a must-do if you come from suburban Canada.
I've heard.
Yeah, so that,
I don't even think you need to put suburban on there.
Yeah.
I think just Canada.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And so that was most of my life up until my early to mid-20s into university, where I realized that it was definitely not an option after schooling, just focus on academics. Even focusing on academics, I was still an average student, you know what I mean? Graduated university with a degree in criminology and realized the military or police was probably my best option with my education and background team sports, the camaraderie, you know what I mean, the competitiveness, the athleticism, all carried over to things I wanted to do civvy side. And it was pretty obvious pretty early on with many of my police applications not going through that I was not going to be hired as a cop in the first few years that I'd been trying. I'd owned several motorcycles, had a fair number of speeding tickets that were kind of precluding me, as well as some other delinquent behavior of my young life. That's policing's probably not in my near future. Segued into the military, joined as an infantry officer in the reserve in 2013. Really, really liked it right away. Had a great time in the infantry, met some really amazing people that are my best friends to this day, whether they were my boss or they worked sort of alongside me, or I was their platoon commander kind of early on. They were just awesome people that this is what I want to do. So I immediately put in what's called a CT, or a component transfer. So moving from the reserve to the regular force army in Canada, what you guys I think call active duty.
Yes, we have reserves as well, and honestly, I couldn't tell you how they work.
Mm-hmm. It's you can get the reserve in Canada. In fairness, is what you make of it. If you want to show up and you want to get things done and you want to volunteer to be on all the exercises and take all the courses, it can be a very good spot to be if you have your civvy life sorted out. I did not. So I was fresh out of university trying to make a go of a young career as a young professional while trying to make a go as a young junior officer. And they just were constantly competing for priorities. And I couldn't get time off from work to go do courses without losing my job, which happened several times in the span of a couple years. Just struggling to make rent, you know what I mean? Like really keeping my head above water while I just kept collecting more bricks. Yeah. So after about 3 years of administration, the CT had finally come through. So I was now on my way to joining the military as a regular force infantry officer. Along the way, I'd picked up a really cool job on the civvy side. Well, cool for me at the time. I was a bodyguard for a fairly wealthy family in Toronto. And it had kind of opened my eyes to the opportunities that were available for close protection, which is a specialization of the military police branch in the military. So once I component transferred into the regular force, I asked for an OT, so an occupation transfer, as a military police officer, so I could go on a close protection course and expand on the skills that I'd already built working for about a year for this family. Couldn't have worked out better for me. Ended up getting loaded on a course right after I graduated from the academy as a military police officer in 2017. Immediately loaded on a course to go train in Blackwater with which is now called Academy with myself and about 25 other guys went down there. Absolutely one of the best experiences of my life. Amazing staff, amazing candidates on course with me, really, really strong friendships with just utmost professionals, guys that really seem to be able to dig in and really lever up their game. Stepping up as a junior guy on the team. I ended up being the only officer that graduated. I think 3 or 4 guys had started the course, but had not completed it with about 50% attrition. So by the end of the course, I was the only officer, which put a little bit more stress on me as I had to do a few more iterations as team leader, but I didn't mind because I was having so much fun. This was truly one of the best opportunities I've ever been given, and I loved almost every minute of being there. It was really awesome. Upon graduation from that course, given what's called a CFTPO. To this day, I don't know what that stands for, but it's a sheet of paper that says you're going to go do something. And I was going to Iraq to lead a team on a close protection mission. I think you guys call it PSD.
We do, yeah. Was it personal security detail? It probably has changed since my time, but that's a common term that we use, yeah, PSD.
So I went to Iraq in the first week of April in 2018. So as soon as you graduated course in December in Blackwater, we went down almost not even 2 months later to go do retraining because that was the course that had graduated, and now we were kind of building teams off of that. So I had new guys. We went down, retrain. Again, amazing experience. So much fun, so much trigger time. Racing vehicles around. I'm guessing you've been there.
I have, yeah.
Yeah, you get to use the track. You got Navy SEAL instructors. Everyone's having a great time. We really bonded there, and it was I couldn't say more good things about it. 6 months in Iraq, came back from that, started my posting in Ottawa as an intelligence analyst.
It's kind of a career shift.
Yeah.
Did you ask for that, or were you voluntold?
I did ask for that. I really wanted to be in Ottawa. Ottawa's a really great place to be for a bunch of different reasons, especially for a junior officer. And if you have ambition, that's where the Tier 1 Special Forces unit is located, is just outside sort of downtown Ottawa.
Are we allowed to say their name? I've had a few of them on. People can Google it. It's JTF2.
Yeah. So
It's not as secret as they want it to be. Sorry. They also have an Instagram page, so I think we're going to be okay.
And some of the ones you've had on are my clients.
Yeah, okay, maybe they're not going to be okay. They were the ones who used that term first, not me.
Yeah, no, that's almost a perfect segue there. So all the things that I'd done had been with the sort of medium to long-term goal of going to JTF2, and I thought that the trigger time I was getting on a close protection course, the experience I had as a team leader overseas, which was nothing short of awesome, you know what I mean, leading these guys and watching them grow personally and professionally to this day. Again, some of my best friends still. Yeah. Really amazing experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And so here we are back now. So it's October 2019. I've just actually failed my first selection. So I went out I got the okay from my chain of command through nothing short of pulling teeth with pliers. As I don't know how exactly it works for you guys, but for us, when you submit something called your NOI or your notice of intent, that you're going to go do something that's not within the pre-approved, you know what I mean, hierarchy of what they have in mind for you to do in their succession plan, it generally gets a negative reaction from the chain of command. And the people at JTF2 actually understand that, and they thank you later when you get there saying, thank you for coming out. We know how arduous it is to get here. So I had to burn a number of bridges every time that I submitted just my NOI and then collect the administration.
Really?
Yeah, it gets ugly.
I mean, it might have changed since I went and I put my package in for selection, but it's actually really straightforward. And you're not burning any bridges. They put out a naval message, which is probably an email at this point, twice a year, because they do and again, I'm 20 years in rearview mirror, but I remember there being a spring and a fall selection. They put a message out, who wants to apply for this. There are certain criteria. If you meet it, you run it through your chain of command. Now, mind you might be in a billet that, if you just got to a new billet and it's a 2-year billet and this is 1 month in, they might tell you to wait for a year, right? Because they're going to get their pound of flesh first from a duty station. But most of the time, it's like high five. Best of luck. You put your package in for it. If you meet the criteria and it lines up, they'll let you screen. But you're not burning any bridges, that's for sure. So it's interesting that they're kind of like you become like a bastard child if you have your intent to go there.
It's so what you said is more or less exactly how it goes for us as well. But it comes with sometimes the caveat that because you usually, especially as a junior officer, you get moved around so much. Every 2 or 3 years, you're in a new place. So no matter where you go, you're going to be a new guy there. And when you let them know your intention is not to actually be there for any extended period of time and you just showed up,
they don't want to invest in you anymore.
You get this negative reaction. And I wouldn't say it's that way across the board. Let's caveat almost everything I'm about to say with nothing is true all of the time. There's always, you know what I mean, outliers and experiences that don't follow along the flow of whatever I'm about to say. But most people, this is an uphill battle to get there. Not to mention the training required just to survive this 7 to 10 days, depending on what's expected of you.
So would you have been an operator? Was your goal there to be an operator there, or would you have gone through as an intelligence staff and support? I'm not incredibly familiar with how it operates. Arraying it against the SOCOM or JSOC, there's we would call it the N3, the operations, and there's layers of people that are supporting, whether we'd call it N2, is it the intelligence, or that would be the Navy, J2 in the joint world. Did you want to be a trigger puller or somebody? Yeah. Okay.
So my NOI was for what they call it, an S1 or assaulter, JTF2. There's other streams of selection for the support staff.
Yeah.
I can't speak to those because I've never done them. I've never actually applied for any of those, but my first selection was for assaulter, S1, whatever you want to call it. I lasted 5 of the 10 days and I got pulled off because I was very obviously suffering physically and there was no chance I was going to leave unless I was pulled or something bad had happened. And to their credit, they saw me on the brink of physical collapse and said, look, you know what I mean? Like, clearly you're not going to stop, so we got to stop you for your own safety kind of thing. And we shook hands and high-fived on my way out, and I went home and slept for a couple days and kind of licked my wounds and figured out how I could figure out training better and come back the next year. So that was 2019. So that's a perfect segue into October 2019. I won't go down too much of a rabbit hole in this because I can't speak to some of these or most of these details, but in October of 2019, there was something called the World Military Games. That's an accurate title? So the World Military Games happened in October of 20. I don't know exactly what it's called.
I just feel like they invited like 3 countries. There's like the UK, Canadians and the United, like, this is the World Military Games. Like, come on, guys.
It was in Wuhan, China.
Stop it.
In 2019.
No, it was not.
Yes, it was.
Yes, it was.
Yes.
So there was delegations from, I believe, over 100 countries that attended this in the fall of 2019.
Okay, maybe I should have given it a little bit more credit.
Yeah.
But in my own personal history, there'd be like 2 people there and call it the World Championship.
Yeah, that's typical military. That would probably be how it goes. And then the winner would be the world champion of all 3 that showed up. So that could either be the biggest coincidence of all time, you know what I mean, from an intelligence perspective of like all these folks went there. Some of them came back to Canada segregated on a plane with what was described as like severe illness. And this is all open source information. Anybody can Google this and find out that we actually kind of, in a roundabout way, tried to cover this information up. It ended up getting leaked several months later. So now we're into about October, November, December of rolling into 2020. Mm-hmm. I actually took a vacation to, again, I don't know, find myself or sort myself out after failing selection. I actually I backpacked up the east coast of Australia from Brisbane to Cairns and back between late November and the first couple weeks of January. So this is essentially during full-on COVID explosion of 2019 becoming 2020.
I'm amazed you were able to get back.
So this is before the world had completely shut down. It's
like the brink of the world shutting down. Right?
Yeah,
I'm trying to remember because I remember the first initial reports. Like, it's not that big of a deal. Then it became a very big deal, and I
let me get there.
Yeah, I have I don't know if this is true, but I swear I remember hearing that they were estimating the death rate at somewhere between 10 to 15%, which was
the IFR, the infection fatality rate.
Again, at the time I wasn't paying a huge amount of attention to it. When I started hearing those numbers, it's kind of let's stop what we're doing and do not that I could do the math on that, but I could probably find somebody who can. Mm-hmm. Let's just say I'm glad it wasn't that high. But I remember those first reports like this might kill everyone. And then, the country locked down.
Yeah, exactly. So at the end of December and early January, I was in northern Australia in a city called Cairns, or if you're from Australia, Cairns, but for the Aussie listeners. But there's a lot of Chinese and Asian tourists in northern Australia just because of the proximity.
Yeah, that makes sense. Same thing as like Hawaii and Japan.
Yeah, so I'm in northern Australia. There's a ton of Chinese tourists everywhere, a ton of Asian tourists. That's normal. Nobody cares. It's just observation, right? So now it's rolling into the first week of January. I believe I flew home January 7th, 8th, something like that, back to Canada. And now I land and I'm back at work, and it's basically full-blown intelligence community aware of and tracking this new respiratory virus coming out of Wuhan. It takes about a month or so for it. It's already hit mainstream media. I believe there's already been, my dates are roundabout here. It's like, these don't really matter in the scheme of things, but the intelligence community by around February basically is saying to us, and again, my role at CF Incom, I'm a cyber intelligence analyst with my specific files being terrorism, organized crime, and crypto. So, and those all overlap and intermingle.
I was going to say, there's a Venn diagram overlap there.
Exactly.
Probably pretty substantial.
Exactly. So by the time February rolls around, maybe it's mid-February, maybe even rolling into March now, word comes down from senior staff that whatever you're working on, essentially put it on pause. If something comes up that's extremely newsworthy, definitely report on it. We need to know. But the appetite of the intelligence community is now COVID. And I don't even think it was called COVID then yet. Like, there was several names that had to be filtered through medical intelligence. We were still trying to figure out what was going on because nobody really knew. Yeah. CNN seemed to really know, you know what I mean? And CBC in Canada seemed to really know that this was going to be nonstop fear mongering for everybody, and everyone's gonna die essentially. But when they pass down the instructions like, hey, focus on this, spend your time focusing on this, as an intelligence analyst, that's what you do. So now I'll say 8 hours a day, but realistically I'm in the gym for at least 2 of those hours. So we'll say 6 hours a day. I'm staring at a computer screen, reading TS network reporting through those. I probably shouldn't even name those networks, but I'm not even sure what that means at this point. But
let's just leave it at the network reporting.
Yeah, and then most of it being open source. You can glean a lot of information if you know how to use open source search engines.
So I held a TSSCI clearance when I was in, and how can I talk about this and not get in trouble?
Exactly.
Let's just say, so the programs that they read you in on, I may have hypothetically Googled around the fringes of some things to see what's out there, and you can find it all in open source. It's just that people don't know where to look or what to look for. I would love to say that I was Jason Bourne being being read in. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm turning this guy's cell phone on and watching him, whatever, brush his teeth. It's like, nope. They'd pull you in and they'd read you in. And this was years later. I just, some peripheral, like, let's see what I can find. And you're like, oh, that's actually a better brief than the one I got.
I think that's accurate. I think that's an accurate assessment.
It's just that people don't know what to look for.
Exactly. Or you haven't been trained on how to use the tools to find the rabbit holes of information that can lead to one another thing. And I worked, again, I want to make sure I take time and pause every once in a while to recognize the brilliant people that I worked with. And like, as an intelligence analyst was my title. I'm a military police officer with no experience in the military police, having just graduated the academy with only sort of tactical experience overseas. I'm now employed in this intelligence role, but I work with people that were so capable, men, women, civvies, military, everything in between. These, like, I learned a lot from working beside these intelligence people, whether they were on the civvy side or not. And it was very interesting. I took a ton from reading books they recommended or hanging out with them on the weekends and just picking their brain. Not necessarily people that I would have run into in my own social circle of meathead athletes, you know what I mean? More book learning type people, but they were very smart and they offered a lot of things that I wouldn't have been exposed to, not in that environment. And I felt very fortunate to be there for a long time. And I forget where I was, but I think it was
rolling into probably the first quarter, end of the first quarter, 2020, I would say at this point.
Yeah. So now we're rolling into March, and it's mid-March, and we're on the brink of the world locking down. And it again, bright people, there for the right reasons, most of them. It's at this point that I actually empathize and can understand the 2 weeks to flatten the curve, because although we had been digging into this for months by now, and there was a lot of information available, and Italy at this point had been demonstrating that there was a lot of old people getting smoked for reasons that are culturally relevant, of intergenerational homes and that kind of thing.
Just people stacked on top of each other.
Yeah, exactly. Again, I empathize and understand why the senior officers that were worried about supply chain shutting down, major, overrunning hospitals, or the capacity of EMTs or anybody to deal with and physicians to deal with these issues. So for the first 2 weeks of Flatten the Curve, I get it. I probably would have done the same thing, which means nothing coming from a junior captain, talking about national level policy decision making, but I get it. So now we're at the end of March. It's now rolling into April, May, June, and I don't know exactly what happened in Montana, but I know a number of U.S. states towards the end of the summer were already starting to open up.
I don't know if I would say...
At least in some capacity.
Yeah,
Florida being one of them.
Florida, if you haven't spent much time there, is where 99% of the crazy people in the U.S. are from and live. All right? You can have a good time down in Florida. Actually, I'm in Florida often. I'm joking. Kind of. All right? Almost every fucked up thing you see on the internet from the United States comes from Florida, though. People riding motorcycles in flip-flops and shorts with like an alligator on the back. That's Florida. That doesn't happen up here.
I think there's a website, peopleofflorida.com or something.
I bet you there's several.
Some of the best mugshots come from there, too.
Oh, I know. Montana took it very seriously. I think everybody at that phase where you're talking about the 2 weeks to flatten the curve, I think everybody was taking it serious. I remember driving down the main street that we crossed, and it was a ghost town. And I forget what I was doing in town at the time, but I stood in the middle of Main Street and looked both directions, and there were no cars, which probably means I shouldn't have been there, but I was. I had that memory. And when I would drive home, there were road signs, like portable road signs that were put into place, putting up digital images like "Stay home, stay alive." It was not a joke by any stretch. Some of the states, Florida definitely was the pointy tip of the spear. I don't know if they would ever fully open. I would say more than anything, perhaps they relaxed what is the term that I'm looking for? The policies were in place. The enforcement perhaps was a little bit relaxed.
Towards the fall, probably. So I think some of these
states,
timelines are going to be a little bit blurry.
Well, some states, let's use the opposite example of Florida, California. Their enforcement was not fucking around. Like they were, it almost got to the point where they were, it seemed like, my words, not necessarily theirs, incentivizing telling on your neighbor. Like, let's just turn people on each other and just create this watchdog society. Montana, not that there weren't precautions in place, and I think there was still the masking guidance, but it was a little bit more of, you're going to do you, and you do you. You know, there was less of that, let's kind of turn people on each other. I feel like the guidance might have been the same, but also Montana has 1 million and maybe 60, or I don't know, 1 million, let's call it 1.25 million people in the entire state. The area that I used to live in San Diego, if you add the couple subdivisions around that, it has that many people. You know, so I'm not saying that there should be compared apples to oranges, but it was certainly different handling. I think the policy might have been the same. The local enforcement of that policy was a little bit different.
It was, so Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal, in that sort of belt that begins kind of in southwestern Ontario and travels up, very heavy enforcement.
Yeah.
Like imagine California, but the entire province, you know what I mean, of Ontario, and then every major city out west. I'm guessing Quebec
was the worst place, I think.
It was like...
Did it start off kind of the same, though, with the 2 weeks to flatten the curve and people thinking this actually might be reasonable? How long into that? Because and this is what I don't understand. And maybe I do to a degree. Those are huge population density areas for Ontario, correct? I mean, that's probably where most of the people live. You're telling me everybody there who was trying to enforce that was a true believer? Like, you know?
I was in Ottawa at the time for all of this, so I can speak to what I saw in Ottawa and then sort of anecdotal conversations I had with friends and colleagues that were in other cities. But as the timeline moved from 2 weeks to flatten the curve, April, May, June, we're still following this instruction of you will dig into this all day, every day, because we need to know what's going on. And there's a really good book written by Dr. Tom Woods, who wrote kind of a chronology of everything that had happened beginning in 2020. This is a really good listen, or a really good read if any of the listeners want to go and kind of follow along with the chronology here. But by the time I got posted out in July to a headquarters position to do some staff role that was definitely not my bailiwick, but between March and July, we had been digging into this, myself included, for months. And there was a lot of open source information coming in that this was not actually the danger that we were being belt fed that it was.
Yeah.
And I had a conversation with a physician just a couple weeks ago, even before I released, who made me promise not to say his name because the guy's actually received death threats for what he's said publicly about just speaking to his knowledge of his profession, of coming out at some point in 21, 22 saying, hey, we can relax. You know what I mean? This isn't actually the end of everything. And the people that cared so much about preserving life were threatening the life of the one of the top infectious disease doctors in Canada. And it was just, anyway, I'm digressing a little bit, but...
It's an interesting point, though. Why do they believe it so deeply in the face of an overwhelming tsunami of evidence? Where does that come from?
I think it's the fear that we were fed
fear of what, though? Because this doctor is saying you have less to fear.
But it was counter the narrative that was being... In Canada, we essentially have 2 or 3 media stations that will give you, you know what I mean, quote unquote, trusted news, right? Mm-hmm. Unless you're going to online journalism, which I expect almost everybody that's listening to this is already on board with. So if you were listening to anything on cable networks well into 2020, like there was no Christmas in Canada in 2020, at least in any of the major cities. Like we were not allowed to see family. We were not allowed, and this is again 6 months later that we're having a lot of this reporting. And this is where it gets...
Keep in mind that the news networks in Canada, the mainstream media in Canada, is subsidized by our government.
Pull the mic just a touch closer.
Sure.
Yeah, you can pull it too. Just move it around. Just try to keep it slightly closer than you think you would want it. Okay, so this brings me to something that I have heard quite a few people say. They think, and then I'm going to be very clear, this falls down the conspiratorial rabbit hole. So if underneath everybody's seat is a tinfoil hat, we can wear them if we want to.
Mine's already on.
Yeah. I've heard people talk about that COVID was essentially a test of how much governments can control their people. A coordinated test to let's see how much we can tell our people what to do. Could we sow dissent? Could we get people to butt heads over a particular issue? And my thoughts on it are, well, if that was a test, I think they failed, because I don't know if people would allow this again. At least in the U.S., I don't know the Canadian mindset on this. We might be a touch more rebellious than some countries in the world. I think they fucked up if it was a test because they pushed it too far. And now people are like, I don't believe you. I'm going to use my own anecdotal information. And oftentimes that is incorrect. I think we should be very clear on that. But let's say COVID 2025 were to come out and it would kill 10 to 15% of the people. I think it would actually do even more damage because people are so resistant now to listening to what the government is telling them to do.
Yeah, I really honestly think that whoever wanted to do it, whether it's WEF or whatever forces were behind it, I think they thought they had far more control of the population than they actually did. And the resistance they hit was far more intense and far more organized than they intended.
Not up front, though. And that's where I think they fucked up. If they would have stopped at a reasonable point, like if it was a training exercise, to use a horribly inaccurate term, you would want to stop at the point where pushing any further would have diminishing results.
Right.
And they went past that to the point where I just don't know if people anymore would listen if the red flags were out there again. I don't know what would happen.
To echo your point, and I agree with a lot of things you just said, just to take a couple steps back, I had to use my military ID to cross the border from Ontario into Quebec to go and visit my girlfriend at the time. There was a police checkpoint between Ottawa, and Ottawa's a border city of Ontario, and driving into Quebec, because if you would drive into Quebec, everyone's going to die of COVID if you're from Ontario. But there's so many people that already cross the border every single day, multiple times a day, because Ottawa housing is quite expensive compared to Gatineau and Aylmer, which is just on the other side of the border. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people have to commute either way anyway. I was one of the people that didn't have to do that very much for work, but because my girlfriend at the time had lived on the other side of in the province adjacent, if I wanted to see her, I had to show my military ID just to cross. Like this was a full on. What you're talking about, I don't completely agree nor disagree with what you just said.
I don't know if I do either. For clarity, I'm repeating things that I've heard people say.
No, and I honestly don't think you're that far off. But to like this level of show your papers type stuff, and then I think it was, how long was the curfew in Quebec for? I think it was 6 months.
I don't remember how long it lasted, but it was a curfew started at 8 p.m. So there's no scientific reason to back it up, still up to this day.
COVID goes to sleep at 7:50. You haven't heard this.
Well, no. You weren't even allowed in your backyard. Your children couldn't go outside.
You needed a dog to be able to have a reason to go outside.
What was if you were to violate that?
A ticket of $1,500, something like that.
Okay, that's steep.
That expensive.
Yeah.
If you hold a party at home as well. We saw on YouTube videos of Gatineau police breaching a door to get people out of a party because it was illegal to do partying at home.
This lasted a long time. This lasted a long time in Canada.
I have so many questions about both sides of that scenario. I mean, I think one of the things that COVID showed us was how damaging isolation is. Suicide rates in the U.S. went up. I'm assuming. I bet you it did globally, anywhere there were lockdown, because isolation I don't think works well for our species, unless you're a sociopath or a psychopath, of which we have plenty south of the border. Again, I'll point you back to Florida.
Well, we've got a prime minister who's one.
For clarity, I did not say that, Canadian government. If you're going to...
Oh, no.
I'm agreeing with Jordan Peterson, who said I diagnosed him as a narcissistic sociopath.
Yeah.
Or a psychopath, sorry.
But so I understand why people would want to get together, where they would want to have a human bond. And then I think of the police. I'm assuming it would be a police that were going to kick in the door. Did they really believe? Did they believe in what they were doing for the greater good, or did they do it because they thought they were going to lose their job? But you know what I mean? I have questions on.
So this is where. So now I'll bring it back to what I saw going on at work, and this is where I have to be careful. But because we were on such a short staff for so many weeks and months, I was kind of the de facto team lead for my smaller team of the bailiwick that we worked with. I was essentially begging my boss to let me go back to work more often because I was so bored and I really just wanted to be kind of on top of things. I liked my job. I liked the people that I worked with, and I wanted to be there more. And they were like, "Okay, pump the brakes. We can only have so many people in. We're working skeleton crew most of the time." So I'm sitting in meetings that I really almost have no business being in, but because I'm the only person there by default, I'm sitting in with directors and very high-ranking people where they're talking about the way forward. And it became very clear to me very early on that there was not going to be another strategy proposed. This locked everything down in perpetuity, was going to continue until they had reached some type of, I don't know, complete destruction, you know what I mean, of morale. And I don't think this was deliberate necessarily as part of some overarching plot. I think we're giving too much credit to the intelligence and organization of the Canadian government to be able to pull something like that off.
I often say the same about the U.S. government. For anybody who's ever and there's amazing people that work there. They do amazing things.
Yes.
But it isn't the razor blade that people think it is, just cutting through the ether of the world. It may or may not look like a donkey with a fly buzzing around its head sometimes. You know, there's everything in between.
But donkeys get it done, though. You know what I mean? At the end of the day.
Depending on what you ask them to do, perhaps they could.
But it just, again, I want to be careful with this, but I'm the dumbest guy in the room, the least qualified to be there, with the least amount of experience most of the time. And because I've been doing this for weeks and months on end to the point of, you know what I mean, my eyes bleeding, reading these reporting and trying to figure out what's going on, there's now conversations with senior level people, whether they're at work, around the water cooler or whatever, where I'm getting completely different versions of reality than what's happening in these meetings. So I'm talking to guys that have been there a long, long time, and I'm saying, what is going on? Like, why are we still doing this to the same severity, you know what I mean, of, you know what I mean, East Germany that we live in Ottawa for this long, and the other major cities that are under this Gestapo rule? Because it was bleak for a long time, and people were really having a tough go. And businesses were locked down for months at a time, and people are openly saying to me in kind of hushed tones, I don't understand. And these are senior people that have, again, their finger on the pulse of what's going on. They're not necessarily in every single meeting, but I trust these people. I look up to these people. They're bright. They know what's going on probably more than I do. And I'm looking to them for advice and guidance of, I can't make sense of this. And my mind is melting, trying to figure out why it's 6, 7, 12 months later. What's going on here? And they're just like, man, I don't know. This is a huge overreaction. And then when the meetings begin, no one says a word. It's just time after, like, there's no possible derail of this. It's like we're on a track of a train that's set to crash in some horrific accident, and no one's willing to pull the brake. No one's willing to switch it so that we can derail this and do something different. There was never an attempt.
It's one of my main criticisms of the approach the U.S. took. I feel like, and maybe it wouldn't have changed the numbers, even though I don't know if there's anything we really could have done to where we were in 2019 to where we are now. I don't know of any approach that would have actually stopped it. I think it was going to make its way through. If you could, I guess, lock the world down for 2 weeks and every single human being couldn't leave their house, maybe. That's a great academic principle. Good luck in practice actually doing that. But in the U.S., and I actually just think from a leadership perspective in general, you know, Fauci was largely the face, I guess, of the U.S. response. I would have had so much more willingness to tolerate certain aspects of it if they would open up and say, this is the best approach that we think we have based off the information we have right now. And then a week from that, if it changed, listen, we want to get in front of you guys again. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know. But instead it was, if you don't do this, everybody's going to die. This over-the-top, I am the figurehead that's going to be giving you the information, and good luck, especially if you want to research or promote information outside of what we were saying. This approach that I know everything and we're going to stay on course, it doesn't work. And I think at some point in time they realized that the approach, I'll use the term, might have been misguided. And I'm not going to apply malice to it, but, you know, because never apply malice when incompetence could in fact be the answer.
I agree.
And I'm not saying Fauci is incompetent, but if you refuse to stand up and tell people what you don't know, you're headed down a one-way path to hell at some point in time. Because how, you know, and he's eventually come out and said, there was no scientific data between this 6-foot rule. And it's like, well, then why the fuck? In every building that I almost went into during that time where there's stickers on the floor that were 6 feet apart. Like, come on. If they would have said, this is what we know, and if it changed and they said, this is new data and this is what we think we need to do, I actually really think people would be far more respected or be far more respectful to that information instead of just, you're going to do this, and if you're not, you're killing grandma.
Well, like back to 2 weeks to flatten the curve, the consequences of underreacting would have been potentially far worse than overreacting.
At that point, when it first came out, I would agree with you.
And that's why I empathize with the decisions that were made at the time. But as these months rolled on and we're getting into past the summer into fall 2021, Florida is now pretty much completely open. You know what I mean? And there's mountains of data now to point out that this is smoking old people. This is smoking people that have comorbidities or obese people. Or if you're old and obese and heart disease and emphysema, like you need to stay inside. You know what I mean? And everybody else, more or less.
And maybe exercise too.
Yeah.
Maybe try to work your way out of those conditions.
Yeah. Forgive me. I left that part out. But it's like it was definitely always had the potential and could have been an age stratified response. And by this time, thousands of doctors were getting together to sign the Great Barrington Declaration, I think it was called, with some of the Martin Kulldorff and some of these people that had gotten together and were completely ostracized from their community for suggesting this. And because of my insatiable need for information after working in this intelligence role for a couple years, and with some of the training and understanding that I'd gotten from these senior people about how to find stuff, I kept looking and I wanted to know, and I had this appetite for information. And it just became more and more obvious to me that it's exactly what you said. It was what can be attributed to malice is probably just somebody effed up. And this is literally nobody wanting to say what we did was probably too much.
Yeah.
And we're going to pivot now.
Well, because I think they feel like if they admit that, they'll lose control. Whatever, in air quotes, whatever control is to them. But I believe the reality is they would actually garner more respect and trust from people because they're telling the truth. If you keep saying one thing, but my objective reality is something completely different, we have diametrically opposed feedback. And my trust in what you're saying, especially when I'm not seeing any of that shit in my day-to-day life, it goes down and down and down. And I talk about this when I do leadership presentations. You know, trust is one of the things you have to guard against because I'll use a bank account analogy. You can make deposits or withdrawals when you interact with people. Fauci being a good example. It wasn't necessarily like directly interacting with me through the TV, but I'm listening to what he says. I understand the role that he holds at the top of the NIH. Saying certain things, seeing the opposite. It's like micro withdrawal, micro withdrawal, micro withdrawal. Eventually, you get to zero. When the trust account goes to bankrupt, you're fucked. I've never been able to trust somebody again that I've totally lost trust in, and I don't know anybody else who has either. And what happens when that person is the head of your COVID response for your country?
Yeah, that's you nailed it.
Or the head of your military.
You basically nailed it.
Why not combine them all? Yeah. But that's the problem. You get zero on trust. And this is, again, why I think if this was the tinfoil hats can go back on, if this was a control test, that's where they fucked up. They hit bankrupt and they should have stopped it before it got to that point. Because then they could have built back trust, whether through being honest or not. And then if they really wanted to pull some, the WHO, like the elites are going to take over, they might have been able to make a few moves. I don't know if they could make any at this point.
I think they're done.
I think so.
I think that's a more or less an accurate assessment of, you know what I mean, kind of a summation of all the things I said. So if we move ahead in the timeline a little bit, so now we're into early 2021, and I'm going on my second selection, which I've been approved for, which further burned bridges, like absolutely engulfed in a raging inferno of bridges. Yeah, I'm famous for this, but I'm successful in my completion of my second selection, and now I get my joining instructions and my congratulation notice within a few weeks. And on my joining instructions, it now says, because now we're into the spring of 2021. It's it's summer now. It's June 2021. I now get my joining instructions. It says every member attending SOAC, Special Operations Assaulter course for JTF2, you will be double or fully vaccinated. I hadn't received anything yet. Okay. Because I was still waiting this out. This was only 6 months into the rollout.
Were they offering it at that point, but it was optional?
It was being offered to military members because we were frontline first responders.
But not a mandate yet.
Not yet a mandate, but my joining instructions said each member will be, et cetera, et cetera. And again, because of my insatiable thirst for information, I didn't quite think that I was the right candidate for these vaccines. I didn't know what was going on yet. I wanted to wait this out. And again, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I received 6 or 7 vaccines, I think, at once before I deployed to Iraq. They stuck me with a bunch of stuff. I had no reason not to trust any of the stuff that I'd been given in my young life all the way coming up. I don't want this to be interpreted as that, but for some reason in my gut, after seeing all of the disingenuous, nothing short of malfeasance that had been going on for about a year and a bit, I was like, this doesn't sit right with me. I'm not sure I want to do this. And that's my own reason. I'm not asking anyone else not to. I'm not picketing with signs. This is, you know what I mean, going to kill us all. And if we remember back before the election, the US election in November, the heads of state in the US were saying the same thing. They were saying this DNA stuff, I don't know about that. You have the president, you've got Kamala Harris, you've got all these people speaking out publicly, talking ill of the mRNA that Trump is trying to Operation Warp Speed or whatever it's called to roll it out. And everybody on the left saying might not be a good idea. And then as soon as the election happened, all of a sudden that narrative flipped on a coin.
Well, I think it's fair to say that it had probably less to do with the vaccine and more to do with the person.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also think, you know, I'm not an anti-vaccine person either. I am highly vaccinated. One of the first things you do in boot camp is you run the gauntlet. And I feel like they were nail guns that were just repurposed for shots. I don't know how it goes in the Canadian military.
It's the exact same thing.
Yeah, you're bleeding down your arms, and then they swing the sickle of penicillin right at your ass cheek, and you're like, ah! Yeah. And I'm like a whole room of people like rolling on their butt trying to like knock out the tension knot essentially of a muscle. So I'm not anti-vaccine at all, but there's a difference in the vaccines that we were given there, and I would say the main difference is they are proven over a substantial period of time. I think that people should ask a lot of questions. And if you are going to be asked to take a vaccine that was created in the same year that you are about to take it, I don't think that there's anything wrong with being a little bit skeptical of that. I don't think that makes you an anti-vaxxer. I think that makes you somebody who says, all right, what do we actually know about this before I go past the point of no return and do an intermuscular injection of this into my body from which I can't reverse it? I think that's fair.
I do too. And I just come from a background where I'd been trained on a new set of skills to employ these critical thinking skills. I'd been put in this role for a reason. You can take in all this information, you know what I mean, find patterns of it, and then write an analysis of it. And my analysis was, I don't think I need this based on what I've found. And I have obviously the certain aptitudes, you know what I mean? I think I'm an average person with above average discipline and above average ambition. So I work really hard, you know what I mean, to get the things that I want. And I displayed those same attributes to be successful through the selection criteria. So I was picked up. I read the joining instructions that said, you will get this. So I had not received either yet. And course was starting in about a week. This was a fastball. Like, you will be here at this time with this kit at this day next week. You need to burn this much leave because you're not going to get any leave for like the next 13 months because you're on course for 13 months.
How did they expect you to get a multi-course vaccine in that time period?
So that's when I immediately called the OR, so the clerks that worked at handling that admin, and I said, look, this starts in a few days. I don't have either yet. What do I do? And they said, well, go get your first one as soon as you can. If you show up with one, it's no sweat. Like, we'll figure it out when you get here. We're not going to deny you. We know how hard this has been to get here. Like, you got picked up for a reason. Like, just get here. We'll figure it out. So I go a day or two later to the needle clinic in Ottawa. I get my jab. I have no problem with it. Like, I'd have no side effects. I think maybe I had a bit of soreness from the injection. That's it. Started course literally within the next 7 or 8 days. I was on course. We're in our in-doc 2 weeks. There's 30 or 40 of us on this course. The platoon warrant comes basically to the front of the classroom in the first week or so of course and says, who here doesn't have, and we're still fully masked up, doing our in-doc and getting our instructions about how to take care of ourselves and special operations, mental agility, and all these things that they teach you when you kind of just get there to put you in the right mindset to move forward. Really good stuff. It was all awesome as far as I'm concerned. But we got called out. Me and only one other guy put our hand up of the 30 or 40 of us that were in there. Like, we need to go get our next shot. So they literally go right to the med tent and get it. The consequences of you not having that now are like, you don't get to stay here.
What was the recommend? I'm not super familiar with the Moderna one.
At least 28 days.
28 days. Okay. So you were...
This was 2 weeks later, or maybe 3.
Okay. So, I mean, you were maybe like over the top of the mountain as far as time between the two, maybe coming down the backside. Still deviating from the guidance, though. From the Moderna guidance, I should say, on dosages.
And again, I don't want this to come off as anti-vax because I'm not, but I didn't think I needed this. I didn't want to get it. But when you put this much time and energy into doing something this hard, and I'd worked a long time to put myself physically, mentally, emotionally to be there, when someone calls you out and says, go get this thing, you go and get the thing.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to lose this job. You've worked for a long time to be here. So I went and got it. That night was an absolute gong show of side effects for me. I think I had every possible side effect that they say you can get, like shivering, sweating, you know what I mean? I couldn't sleep. I felt like I was burning, but I was shaking with cold. I couldn't stop sweating. Just nausea, like everything you can have. I just felt sick to my stomach all night, barely slept. I don't think I slept at all. So I'm back in the classroom the next day, just absolutely exhausted. Asking the other guy, like, how did you, I think he was fine. He's like, oh, it was good to go. Nothing. And I was like, oh, cool. You know what I mean? Like, just me then.
Yeah, me too. Such a good night.
No issue. And that was more or less kind of the beginning of the end for me. I didn't know at the time, but almost right away, I just started getting, the fatigue was setting in. We had long days on the range. We had early mornings. I loved it. I loved being there. The trigger time, the instruction, the staff, everybody there was there for the right reasons, in my opinion. And I was having some of the best days of my life, you know what I mean? Bringing me back to my time at academy, overseas. Like, it was just why I joined. And these guys were all on the same page, and I was around people that's the same discipline, the same ambition that I had. Everyone's a stud, you know what I mean? Just great time all around. And every week that went on, I was just more and more sluggish. Just this nagging back pain that I had attributed to the amount of reps I'd put in to get through selection, then doing actual selection. By the way, doing selection at 37 years old, which is, I was 29 when I joined the military. It took me about 8 years to align myself with where I was. So 37 this is a young man's game to get through these.
For sure.
Yeah. So now we're into the last week of September. I'm in Petawawa doing some green phase training. It's more or less the second phase of the course. I'd already demonstrated a number of deficiencies in training that were completely on me in terms of safety, performance, just bombing a couple tests that I had no business failing, but between nerves of the fear of going back to the chain of command that I had just destroyed, you know what I mean, on my way there. It was just, I put a lot of pressure on myself that I probably didn't need to. I should have just lived one day at a time in the moment, because I noticed the guys that were the most successful there, I think, were having that mindset. I sought some of them out to get advice, and that's more or less what I got from them. So it's now the end of September, and the warrant calls me into his sort of makeshift office in this makeshift fob that we have to simulate green phase training. And he's like, you're going to go back to Ottawa tomorrow to talk to the CO, because like, you're on the bubble and we got to figure out what we're going to do with you. And I'm just like, like heartbreaking, you know what I mean? Because I don't know what's going to happen to me in the next 24 hours. So I hop on a van. We drive back to Ottawa. I got to shave this beard off that I've grown and try to look somewhat respectable. Find the one clean uniform that I've buried away somewhere in my locker so I can go and sit in front of the entire brass of JTF2, which was seriously intimidating for someone in my shoes on the bubble, having never failed anything before. You know what I mean? Demonstrably in this way, I'd been pretty successful at things I'd done with certain setbacks for injuries and finances that I was in my reserve days. But like, I wanted to stay there more than anything because how much time I'd put into getting there. And they basically just said like, look, thanks for coming out. You know what I mean? You've demonstrated a lot of skills that not a lot of guys have, you know what I mean? But we're going to move in a different direction and you're going to be RTU'd. So you return to unit. Mm-hmm. So it's during this time that I'm clearing out of the unit. I'm going back, trying to figure out my future. And as I'm clearing out of the compound, as I'm literally walking around the base with this piece of paper in this archaic format that they still use, you get a stamp and then they sign you back to your old base. As I'm walking around the base, I have this nagging pain in my calf that I'm chalking up to just being in the field for the last 6 weeks. So I'm just kind of beat up. I'm an old man at this point and I'm just sore. So fast forward, I think 4 or 5 days from clearing out, and now I'm kind of in this limbo. I think they gave me a couple days downtime to segue before I went back and kind of reported to my staff job. And I'm now hunched over in the hospital because I'm in so much pain in my right leg that I can't stand up or walk. So I basically drove myself to the emergency at the military hospital in Ottawa, where they rushed me to an ultrasound because they didn't know what was wrong. And I didn't know what was wrong. They did an ultrasound and found a 6.5 centimeter blood clot.
I feel like that's big, and I don't know anything about blood clots.
According to the hematologist I spoke to a few weeks ago, it's not small.
Okay.
But it's not completely unusual, but it's relatively big as far as blood clots go. So I've got this blood clot, essentially, like, now I'm on downtime, like, you're not going back to work anytime soon. You're going to take blood thinners for the next 2 months. We got to monitor you. It was just below my right knee, which in the realm of blood clots is actually much safer than if the blood clot is above your knee, so moving up your thigh, because a DVT becomes sort of exponentially more dangerous if it's above your knee for it to travel to your heart, your brain, or your lungs, and then you have a real problem with embolisms and things like that. So I guess that was a good thing, but this thing was so painful for so many weeks. I could barely stand. I had to sit with my leg elevated to keep any pressure off of it. Within a number of, I'd say probably 3 or 4 weeks, most of it had subsided. I was doing follow-up ultrasounds. It was on the way to dissolving. It had not had any major sort of follow-on problems. So now it's November of 21, and I'm back at my old unit trying to figure out my own future. And I think that's a good time to hand it over to you folks to talk about what was going on in the background, because I had no idea of any of this. Like, my world was
you were living your life,
front sight focused.
Yeah.
I didn't use my phone most of the time. I was just on my own thing, and then all this is going on in the background, and this story is pretty heart-wrenching.
So,
Frederick.
Yeah, I guess it's my time. So let's explain my perspective on this few years we had. Let's go back in 2020. In March of 2020, I've just finished my supply technician course up in CFB Borden, Ontario, and they asked us at the end of the course where we wanted to get posted. They needed a lot of bilingual francophone up to Edmonton, Alberta, so I volunteered to go up there to boost my career. At first, I was a young soldier starting my career, so you want to do a good impression. So I went up there. And the first day, I went up there with my pickup truck with all my my luggage and military equipment.
Hold on. What type of pickup truck?
Toyota Tacoma.
All right.
2 doors.
2-door?
4x4, lifted, all black.
How lifted?
3-inch.
Rookie numbers. 6-inch minimum in Montana. All right.
Especially if he's moving to Alberta.
Of course. Rookie numbers, Frederick.
I see. I drive a Tesla now.
I don't know if that's better.
Me either. Yeah. All right, let me continue. So basically, first day, arriving at Edmonton, Alberta, I pick my room, my shack on base, and I receive a text the next day because I was getting prepared to fill up. Sorry, I was dressing up to get prepared to my day to meet my chain of command for my new career. And I just received a text while eating breakfast at the mess at the cafeteria of the base from my chain of command telling me that there's going to be a 2 weeks off for you because we closed the base basically. So I was like, all right, nice. I just arrived at a new base. I will have plenty of time to set up my stuff, my room, buy a coffee machine and stuff to get Gucci. And after those 2 weeks of getting prepared, I was working out and Netflix and chill, playing video games. You have 2 weeks off. You take it easy.
Frederick, do you know what Netflix and chill means?
Yes.
Okay. Were you just Netflixing and chilling by yourself?
By myself.
Okay. I'll let the listener fill that in. Just wanted to make sure it has the same meaning up there.
All right, let me continue.
Yeah.
So after those 2 weeks of doing nothing very important in my room, I've received another text message from my chain of command telling me that that 2 weeks will be expanded for 3 weeks, 3 more weeks.
Is this right at the time of Flatten the Curve? 2 weeks?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. So at the end of March, beginning of June, 2021. So begin to start talking about vaccine eventually that will roll out. So I'm all by myself in my room, no friends whatsoever. It's a new province. I just moved out. I had no chance to meet any colleague whatsoever. I didn't work one day yet. And it's been almost 1 month being isolated by my room by myself. So that isolating period started. And spoiler alert, it lasted 7 months doing nothing in my room. So getting 7 months free time doing nothing in my room, full salary, paycheck every single 2 weeks. I was starting to wanted to do something monthly active. So I bought myself a laptop, stopped watching Netflix, and I started to analyze every news station around the world, watching the news, following the COVID-19 coverage from the beginning and up to this day, actually. And I saw so many weird things, such as at summer 2021, during summer 2020, I saw a post on Twitter from Justin Trudeau telling the Canadian population that he just signed up a freaking contract with Moderna to have booster shot until 2025. And I was like, there's not even one shot available now. And you talk about boosters, it seems to me like a subscription of some kind about vaccine. And and I saw, like you said earlier, in Europe, a few countries started to ban the distribution of the Moderna vaccine for younger folks, 30 years old and above and under, to receive that vaccine because there was proof that there were more threats to receiving that vaccine than just getting the COVID-19
itself.
A virus,
yeah.
Exactly. So, so all in my mind was I was watching all that unfold, and I knew eventually the CAF the Canadian Armed Forces, will ask us to receive it eventually. So I knew in my guts that I will need to prepare for that. So let's jump until falls 2020. Sorry. Give me 30 seconds.
Yeah.
I'm blank, sorry.
That's okay. You're jumping ahead. You're preparing yourself. You know that the Canadian Armed Forces are going to require a mandate at some point. Is this after the 7 months you've been in the barracks room, or some point along during it?
Yeah, exactly. After that 7 months of analyzing everything that was unfolding around the globe and comparing news networks with each other, I got married because during that time I had a girlfriend that she got posted to CFB Valcartier, and I was posted to CFB Edmonton. So we were very far apart, and we decided, like a lot of people in the military, to get married together, to get posted together during that COVID-19 pandemic.
For some real Netflix and chill, if you know what I mean.
Exactly.
Okay.
So so we got married in December of 2020. 2021, sorry. I messed up my time frame. So yeah, I got posted with that, with getting married. Let me start over. Sorry.
Take your time, man. It's fine.
Okay. At the beginning of 2021, in April of 2021, I finally got posted back to Quebec. I wanted to go back to Quebec City to get with my girlfriend, my ex-girlfriend. And when I get back to Quebec City, I quickly discovered that in this province, it was managed way different than any other provinces in Canada, because that's what I think of it. The Quebec province, if it's the only province that have a language barrier. We speak mostly just French, and most of us don't understand English. So we just watch our news francophone networks basically, and there's only one or two, and both are getting subvention from the government to push a message, that COVID-19 message back then. And what they did in Quebec, it was devising dividing the whole population in two categories: the one that wants to get the vaccine and believe that narrative, and all the other ones. And they keep doing everyday coverage and everyday pressure to scare people to not be part of that minority of people that just don't want that vaccine. Because automatically, if in Quebec you were on vax, it was super difficult socially to just go to the gym, because you needed a QR code, a proof of vaccination, to go to any social places such as bar, go to the gym to get a fit, basically. To get some tools at Home Depot, you needed a QR code. What's the point? What's the science behind it?
They're like checking the QR code at the door?
Every single time.
Wow.
Yeah. During that time, I used to do some Uber, because let's go back to the time frame, because I want to be logical here. So I just got posted to CFB Valcartier. It's April 2021. They start talking about rolling out a vaccine. At first, they said it will not be mandatory. It will just put your career on hold. You will not get promotion. You will not get to deploy to any kind of...
Not mandatory, just stops your career.
Yeah.
Got it.
And at first, I was down with that, because
coercion.
I was at the beginning of my career, simple private supply technician. And my health had a way better important priority in my life than freaking that career. But I wanted a huge military career, such as my grandfather. He did 25 years as an artillery officer. So pretty proud of that. And I wanted to continue something like that with my family military career. So so they started to talk about the vaccine mandates. And of course, I didn't want it, because back 6 months later, I knew that Moderna, that's the one we got in the CAF, the Canadian Armed Forces, we have been told, just take Moderna. Never go to civilian side, get another one. Military members are requested to go take the Moderna one. It was weird. Why? I don't know. And June 2021, we all got an email with a specific date to go to the arena on the base to receive the vaccine. It was mandatory to assist that appointment, but it was not mandatory to take it.
So you had to be there, but you didn't have to take it?
It was a choice. But the way they put it, it's a choice to push you towards one specific choice.
Of course.
Because let me explain, in that arena, it was all a setup. When you enter that arena, it was a hockey arena without ice on the floor, so you can step on it. And we were like full of people, like hundreds, lined up. And they asked everybody to watch a video talking about the safetiness of the vaccine, and if you refuse, will stop your career, blah blah blah, all that blah 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 first before letting you choose whatever you wanted or not. And what they did was disgusting, what I think. We are all piled up in the arena, all lined up, and they said, everyone that wants the vaccine, remove your tunic. It's like the first piece of...
Your top.
Exactly.
Yep.
You just have your T-shirt leaving.
Yep.
So automatically you have that peer pressure as a person you don't want to take that vaccine. You keep your full uniform on. So every colleagues, friends, superiors, officer, chain of command are watching you. And it's not like a secret choice. It's not like... it's a choice that comes with peer pressure. Because if I'm not strong enough mentally with my belief and my values, and I have too much ego, I will want to stay like everybody else.
How many people took their top off?
90%, 95%.
90%? Okay. So the vast majority.
Yeah.
Okay.
And everybody that was willing to take it, the next step was to... after the choice of removing the tunic or not, we went to see a medic person, and on a piece of paper he had all the list of the soldiers, and if he asked you then if you wanted the vaccine or not, and if you didn't choose to take the vaccine, he picked a freaking pink highlighter and put your name super highlighted. And if you just say yes, check mark, that's all. So I had that pink highlight, and he said, go take that exit. And it was not the main exit like everybody else. I was getting out through the freaking trash door in the back. Weird. I don't know why. I was treated right at that point. Everything after that, I was treated differently. I felt I was treated differently because I was just refusing a medical treatment, basically. So after that, a few months later, falls 2021's freaking Justin Trudeau decided to make it mandatory when he freaking reached the majority of military members to have that vaccine. I guess it's easier to just make it mandatory after. So even more peer pressure to take it. So if you choose to not take the COVID-19 vaccine, what we have been told is we will be put without salary, without pay.
Leave without pay.
That's what I've been told. But my chain of command decided to do something different. So I've met my chain of command multiple times because from their perception of view, I was refusing a legitimate order, an order to receive a medical treatment. And in my book, in the military, we cannot receive an order to receive a medical treatment or receive any order to have sexual act against somebody or whatever. It's like, it's your choice. It's your body. You choose whatever you want. So I was feeling that I was like beginning to be a bad soldier by just refusing something like that. But in my mind, I was like, it's freaking my body. So I should have a choice. So now they realized that I was a black sheep refusing the vaccine. They told me I was the only one refusing the vaccine in my whole unit, a supply company. It was a lie. I heard a few months later that it was a lie. We were like 60 refusing it at first, but we were all isolated in our own world thinking we were alone. Even more peer pressure to take it. And after a few months, I heard that I was now the real alone. So what happened since I think it was in October 2021, after the mandates, every unvaccinated soldier I was requested to no longer enter any military building on base because I was unvaccinated. So in their mind, I was entering a building, I will contaminate the whole building. Because, hey, new logic of 2021, you go get a vaccine to protect yourself, but it do not protect yourself if not everybody gets it. Like, it doesn't make sense. So I was ordered not to enter any military buildings, but I was still getting a pay. So it was weird for them to just say, just go home and do nothing. So they said, you will still need to come show up at work. But since you cannot work inside, you're going to just stay at ease in the front of your building, the main door of your building. And that's was building 188, the supply company building in CFB Voluntary. And I needed to show up at 15 minutes prior to 7:30 in the morning, because 7:30 it's the main hour everybody enter the base to go to work. So they wanted me to use me as a figure of somebody that doesn't follow the rules. What will happen to you? So I was being used to as an example, basically. So every single morning I was ordered to show up 15 minutes prior to everybody else coming to work, to stand at ease at the main door of my building. So everybody walking by me, not most people, but a few of them, just straight up insult me every single day. Like, you just have to take it, the vaccine, you're stupid. Like, you're gonna lose your job for a small needle in your arm. And in Quebec, like I said earlier, the news media divided our whole population in two parts. And if you were unvaccinated, you were automatically a conspiracy terrorist. So I was insulted that name multiple times as well. on a daily basis. So just imagine at the same time period, while living that struggle and humiliation on base by my chain of command, while experiencing that, my ex-wife she's still in the military. She was in 2021 back then, during that time, deployed to Latvia for a NATO mission, and while up there, she was cheating on me. So mentally, I was dealing with that personal problem. Mm-hmm. I told my chain of command about that. They knew I was weakened mentally because of my personal problem of my relationship, and they didn't care. I think they took that opportunity to, he's already awakened. Let's freaking destroy him right now. He will take the vaccine.
What Fred hasn't added in there is that it was December, January, February, extremely cold temperatures.
In Quebec.
He's standing outside.
How long would they have you stand outside?
Stand outside doing nothing just to
as the
serve
showpiece. Yep.
Exactly. I think 1 month.
No, like for
like
an hour or two?
Oh, until like 10, 11, until they say go eat lunch and come back to 12 before everybody, come back to 1 before everybody comes back to lunch. Because they wanted me there the first day in the morning, mostly because most traffic going to the building. Same thing at lunch and same thing at dismiss time.
So all day long you're standing out there?
Mostly, yeah. And after 3 weeks, because I was dealing with my ex-wife cheating on me, plus dealing with all that bullshit on base, when you wake up every single morning, that first 60 seconds when you wake up, that's when you take back your consciousness about your life, like what's my name, what I'm doing today, and such. And during 2021, that was the worst part of my day. That first 60 seconds when you wake up, I had all of those things going towards me, like your wife is cheating on you, so you're going to be alone soon. Get ready for that. Your freaking job, you're going to lose it eventually and your reputation on base went down in a few weeks. Mm-hmm. Because when you join the military, I like to compare the military with high school, because there's a lot of ego within the military, and your reputation is very important to go up very quick in your career. So as a black sheep like that, getting humiliated, it killed my reputation right away. So even if I was saying like it's not me cheating on my wife, she used that momentum to tell her story. She said she's never cheated on me, but it's the other way around. But hey, I'm the unvax, I'm the conspiracy theorist, I'm the one getting fired, so my opinion doesn't care. So so dealing with all that, January of 2022, that torture continued. I decided to request some help from the Padre, because I was losing after all of those weeks and months of mental and physical torture and the cold. I requested the help from the Padre because I was not eating anymore, and I had no good lifestyle whatsoever during those times. I had difficulties to sleep, difficulty to eat, as I've lost 15 to 20 pounds of muscle mass. And I decided to send an email to the Padre. He reads it. He did answer me. He said he passed the message to the chain of command to make it stop. The chain of command received that email from him, the Padre.
Who is the Padre? Sorry.
And they decided...
The chaplain.
Chaplain. Okay.
Sorry. And my chain of command have been aware of that, and they just closed their eyes. And it continues.
What also Fred wouldn't have known at that time is there was a lieutenant colonel who saw him standing outside and actually called his chain of command, who was a major, and pulled her up on it and said, what the hell's going on? Yeah. And she still ignored him.
Was it her choice, or was she directed from higher outside of her chain of command to do that to him?
No, I think it was her.
Fuck, that's crazy, Frederick.
I think was her choice of teaching a lesson.
Yeah.
The abuse of power in the Canadian Armed Forces is horrific, and I've been watching them for a long time. And now, in October 21, when this mandate came in, And all these stories start coming in my office. I'm like, there's my case, because they can't ignore hundreds of these people, all with these type of stories.
What is the Canadian military equivalent of the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice?
Or a Code of Service Discipline.
Okay, because inside, there are punitive things you can do, but in the U.S. military, you have to be inside of the bounds of the UCMJ. Yep. Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming the same thing largely for the CAF as well. Yeah, I'm not so sure month after month after month of that falls inside of the boundaries of that.
Well, if she did that to a prisoner of war, she'd be in The Hague for a war crime.
Yeah.
Valcarce is cold in January.
It's bitter.
It is cold. It is not a fun place to be outside for an hour, let alone many hours.
And my thought was, when I heard his story, we actually went looking for him because we heard his story, that's the kid I actually want in the trenches with me, standing up for his principles and willing to say no.
So let me continue.
January 22.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. 2022.
So when the Padre and a lot of people on base started to talk about me, the guy standing every single morning, they decided to make me less public on base. So I've stopped doing that, showing up every single morning at the front of my door, the main building I was working at, and I started to do degrading and stupid tasks outside, such as, it was winter. Go there and you see those old falls, dead leaf from falls. Go pick it up. But they're exactly where they're close to the building, close to those doors building where those people work inside, so they can knock on the window and make fun of you. That's what I've experienced. Go fucking at 430 unit, remove some small bushes stuck in the fence up the way up there. Like, it's degrading task just to make fun of you. Like, just put me at home, no pay. I'd rather that.
Yeah.
So in January, when I keep receiving suggestion from my chain of command to release, unless it will continue that suffering, I decided to...
Does release mean exit service?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Voluntarily, but push a lot. So I called my parents to actually ask some help because I was about to lose my job, and also I was about to get divorced. So I needed a new place to live, to have some free time to be able to get back up on my knees, get back up basically. And they refused. Because my parents, you need to know that they watch the news, the Quebec news every single day since I'm born. So they have been into that huge fear given by the media, that division against anti-vaxxers, unvaccinated people. So my parents, up to this day, don't talk to me. And the last time I've called them, it was requesting some help, telling them I'm about to lose my job. Can you just give my room back at home? It's my choice, but I don't know. I know you don't believe within my choice and you don't respect it, but just help your kid. And they said, no, it's your choice. You just need to take the vaccine and you will keep your great career. And that's when I decided to just stop talking to them.
Have they reached out to you at all since then?
No.
I can't fathom as a parent making that decision and cutting my child off because of a decision over a vaccine, especially as information continues to cascade in about what's actually happening in the world around us. That sucks, man. I'm sorry.
The fear narrative pushed in Canadian media was horrific.
I was going to say, what the fuck were you guys watching on the news? Was there a dragon spitting like COVID out of its mouth?
Imagine CNN on steroids is what we get fed through the CBC in Canada.
And keep in mind that they also brought in legislation in the last year that prohibits people from putting links to news into social media. So
what?
if I found a link to a story even on CNN and I wanted to link it into my Twitter account, I'm blocked.
What is their reasoning behind that? Like, how could you argue that in front of a group of rational people and get that passed?
Well, they used money. They said if the links were depriving the news sources of income because these stories were being like...
Yeah, that's the news source's problem.
Exactly.
If
That
your
was my
business
thought.
model isn't working anymore, you need to evolve.
Well, and maybe if I click a link and go over to your website, I might hang around over there to
Yeah.
see the ads. But yeah, and right now we've got a bill that's sitting there and may go through. It's called the Online Harms Act. And you can be held responsible for any comment you've ever made online.
Oh,
the
this
past.
podcast is over. And I don't mean this episode. I mean, I'm getting shut down, period.
and into the future, if they deem that it's hate speech, you can be imprisoned for. I'm going to back up. You get a fine of $20,000, and you have to pay the government $50,000. You have to pay $20,000 to whoever complained, and they can be anonymous. And if they deem that you might possibly say something harmful online, just might, thought police time, you'll be in prison for life.
This is a real thing. This is called
What the
this is a
fuck
real
is
thing.
going on in Canada?
This is called pre-crime.
Yeah.
They're gonna.
That was a good movie, though. Tom Cruise nailed it.
Yeah, exactly. You're gonna face litigation and possible prison time for things you are about to do, probably.
Yeah.
Who is driving this?
That's the Trudeau government.
How can any reasonable person, and I consider myself to be reasonable, don't get me wrong, I have some edge cases in my history and hopefully future as well. I don't understand how anybody could see this leading down a path that is good.
So they're selling it to the public through their controlled media as protecting children from online harm.
And it does actually have embedded in it some measures that make sense, that are both reasonable and rational along those veins, and that's how they sneak everything through. Yeah. If you read the bill, it talks about certain protections for children from predatory behavior and weird, pedophile stuff that
but leave the bill with that.
But that's never how it works, right?
How hard is it to get this unwound should it pass in the Canadian government?
I think it's at the second reading still.
It's at the second reading. So there's a good chance if the Liberals continue to stay in power till October 25, it will go through.
But if it gets signed into law, I'm assuming it would be, how hard would it be to get it unwound in the future?
As a lawyer who practices in Canada, it's going to be a really big challenge to get it passed our judiciary and get it thrown out. And the time it would take. By the time you go into your first level of court, go through an appeal, and if the Supreme Court of Canada will allow you to bring it to demand that the government change it, we're looking at 5 to 6 years down the road.
I am not an expert at anything, but in my own experience and just watching people who assume a position of power and then are given more, they are almost always unwilling to cede that power back.
Right.
Governments are the worst examples of this. In the U.S., the Patriot Act. Sounds great. People have no idea how much privacy they signed away with the Patriot Act. And they would vote for it. I think a lot of people would, just given the name. And they'd say, well, I'm not a criminal, so what does it matter? I'm like, it matters a lot, actually, that privacy that you have from your government. Mm-hmm. You think the government's going to unwind any of these programs? Fuck, no, they're not going to.
So keep in mind, this is the government that when the convoy was sitting in Ottawa, bouncy castles, hot dogs, barbecues, no violence, nothing going on. They invoked the Emergencies Act.
I don't even know what that is.
The Emergencies Act is used for extreme times of war where civilian police, etc., cannot control what's going on, and you now need to bring in martial law.
That's the power that it allowed them to do, is bring in martial law.
That's what they brought in. And when that happened, the day that happened, my heart sank. Because Canadians did not realize what our government had just done. They stripped us of everything. We had no rights whatsoever. They seized people's bank accounts.
People that donated.
People donated to
a
the convoy.
donation from a random person was at risk of having their accounts frozen.
Donate $20 through Give, Send, Go. Someone had hacked it and handed it over to the government, and they were using it to seize bank accounts. They shut down credit cards.
Are you sure somebody hacked it and the government itself wasn't just monitoring it?
The guy actually came forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like, speaking of my own government, that they might have been watching that in real time.
Well, they might have been, but they got beat to it.
Yeah.
Somebody had to buy it from somebody. But
you guys were following the convoy up here.
The only thing that stopped them.
I was aware that there was a convoy. I'm not going to say I deeply understood what the mission statement or the meaning of the convoy was, but I was aware that it was happening for sure.
The problem with the convoy is that it clearly demonstrated to Canadians that ordinary Canadians can change things. And that was not a narrative that the current government is happy for Canadians to have, because these were ordinary blue-collar working people, or our Prime Minister called them last week overall people.
Okay.
Yep. And
I mean, first off, I like a nice set of overalls.
yeah, exactly.
Who doesn't?
Several pockets that I don't even know what goes in there, but I fill them up with stuff.
Yeah. And so basically they all converged on Ottawa to protest these massive lockdowns and everything that was happening. Stayed completely peaceful. I was so proud of them because there was no violence. Anybody that showed up that might be a little bit of an issue, like say a neo-Nazi, whatever, they were run off.
Self-policed?
Like and they had come to an agreement with the police to move the convoy so it wouldn't interfere so much with downtown Ottawa. That was already in the works. And then he brings in the Emergency Measures Act, and which, ironically, his father, when he was Prime Minister, brought in the War Measures Act, which was exactly the same thing in 1972. So like father, like son. But the sad part is that, and then they had a commission they're required under law. A year later, they have to have a commission to see were they justified to do it. And it was a friend of the Trudeau family who was the person that led it and said, oh, yes, they were absolutely justified. Now come to earlier this year, and a hero of a judge from the federal court heard about the Emergencies Act. They brought it into the court, people who had that were harmed by it, and he said, no, you cannot. The Emergencies Act was a far overreach. No, you were wrong to bring it in.
What will be the impact of that decision?
So basically our Prime Minister, our Deputy Prime Minister, our senior ministers all committed an illegal act.
Will they be censured for that? I feel like he's probably not going to get kicked out of office.
No, because in Canada, no one can bring charges except the Crown. And the Crown is the Attorney General, who is a minister of this cabinet.
That seems like a dangerous setup.
That's a dangerous setup.
So I was living in Ottawa during this time. So this is several months after I've come off course now, and I'm trying to figure out my way. I'm still dealing with sort of health problem after health problem. I went to the convoy to check it out. It was just a couple kilometers from where I was living, and it was quite literally what she described. Like there were some people who were probably pretty drunk in public in Canada. That's not that weird, you know what I mean? In the city,
not uncommon, atypical, if you will.
but for the vast majority, if not almost everybody there, was well behaved, relatively well organized, with even routes for emergency medical response, open lane, things like that. So if
crime actually went down in downtown Ottawa,
if you needed an ambulance to get through what was this lethal blockade of misogynists and rapists, they were called from the Prime Minister, you could get through if you needed to. And I went and checked it out. Found out later on through someone who I won't name because everybody that I mentioned in any of this story, I can't name anyone's name because I reached out to people individually, specifically to say, what can I say of what you told me, or what are you comfortable with me repeating in the next couple of weeks when I'm visiting you?
Yeah.
And every single one of them said, do not use my name. There is a culture of absolute fear on all these people, whether they're medical professionals, whether they're in the military, civvy side, colleagues of mine, friends of mine, people that I've had a lot of time in the last 2 years of being slowly medically released for all of these issues I've been having. The blood clot was just the beginning. In 2022, I was diagnosed with a rare form of an autoimmune disorder that's degenerative in my spine, that they can't explain where that came from. So I went from being basically the most fit I've ever been in my life, being able to handle and sort of thrive in an environment where it's nothing but austere during 12-day long selection, to being diagnosed with something that could potentially, worst case scenario, hyperbole, I could end up in a wheelchair. You know what I mean? With the direction that my spine might be headed.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of mingling within the convoy. I just went to see it for myself to see what's going on, and it was literally hot dogs, sandwiches, you know what I mean, hot coffee. There was a couple DJ booths set up. People were dressed up in full Canadian winter gear, partying. There was no animosity. I didn't see any anyway. I can't speak for every single day. I was only there once. But it had gotten back to me through this confidential person that my name had come up in a meeting within the military of intelligence gathering that had gone on in Ottawa, that I was seen there. And he thought enough of me, because he's a buddy of mine, to reach out and say, hey man, FYI, like your name came up in a meeting. Like you're on the radar.
How did they know you were there?
They had, my guess, They had people on the ground collecting HUMINT, which is not all that unreasonable to do as a counterintelligence member. But
did you have your cell phone on you?
Of course.
They might have had SIG in too.
So good segue. 5 separate times during the convoy, the Canadian military authorized and flew a spy plane over top of the convoy, directly over top of the convoy on 5 separate training missions, which is a highly advanced signals intelligence sort of
platform, if you will.
Yeah. So this is like comms research people that use the super advanced tech on this plane. Forgive me, it's been a few years since I've been out of the cyber realm, to gather and sort of aggregate signals intelligence, pinging the phones on the ground.
All they would need to do is fly essentially a fake cell phone tower.
Yeah, that's kind of what they are.
And to get the cell phone to interrogate the tower, and they got everybody who's there on the ground.
So after talking to Catherine about this a little bit, like this is not legal.
I was going to ask. So in the U.S., we have passi comitatus, I should say. Comitati. I don't know. I think toddy is a hot alcoholic beverage. Passi comitati might be a delightful name for a coffee. Passi comitatus is what I was talking about, though. I actually might pitch that one to our managers at the coffee shop. Like, we need a morning beverage, passi comitati. Military, I'm not going to say it's always adhered to 100%. The military should not be doing that shit. Right. Military cannot be used for a policing capacity in the U.S. by doctrine. Is there something like that?
Absolutely.
In Canada? Because I know...
So let me say, allegedly, this happened. Allegedly. It was a training mission in which that was not conducted. But it just so happened to happen 5 times within the Convoy and Emergencies Act happening, where there's unruly racist Canadians burning, you know what I mean, the city down, eating hot dogs on Sussex Avenue.
And just before that, CAF was busted for doing a PSYOP on Canadian citizens. And the public health admitted to tracking 33 million cell phones.
There's so much to unpack here. Like, I don't want to, you know what I mean? We could do this all day back and forth. I mostly just wanted to share things that I know that I've seen.
Yep.
But when you start digging into open source stuff of what's going on and you start kind of putting pieces together, like maybe it was a training mission. Maybe it was.
But if it was a training mission and that was the platform, it's likely they had the operational equipment on. Unless they were doing a pilot training mission and just training the pilot to fly the aircraft.
Again, entirely possible, if not plausible, we'll say. But it just seems pretty suspicious to me that that's going on. At the same time as they're conducting human intelligence on the ground, at the same time as they're using cell phone towers to track Canadians who are supposed to be locked down, and they're using our cell phone data to track our movements to see if we're adhering to these lockdowns. That was the justification they gave for doing it, and there was no consequence whatsoever.
And they're also tracking banking to see who's donating to the convoy.
And then canceling the people that donated. Some of them, obviously, not everybody was canceled, but a number of people that just gave $20 to a truck driver through Give, Send, Go, or what was the...
Well, they started with GoFundMe, that whole $10 million was seized by our government.
What'd they do with it?
They take it. They haven't given it back.
I was going to say what they do.
It went back to the donators. Yeah. Well, that's what they said.
And then they went to Give, Send, Go and raised another $10 million within a few days, and the government was.
They couldn't touch that because it was
not happy because Give, Send, Go told them to pound sand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Frederick, I didn't want to cut you off. Did your story come to an end? Did you make the choice to exit the military?
Yes, I decided to make the choice to exit the military with a push voluntary release.
Yeah.
And then I decided to buy myself a Tesla, and that's where I started to earn my life again by doing some Uber in the old town of Quebec City.
Okay.
And I never earned that much money in my life.
Really?
Crazy.
Fucking awesome.
Uber, electric car, best match ever.
Okay. Fair enough.
And so in summary, to complete what they were saying, basically, if you are a Canadian that truly loves your country, you're a patriot, and you want to serve your country, like me. I went to the military, and it ended my career like that. You see the convoy. There's just a bunch of people loving the country up there, and they put Emergencies Act over people that love truly Canada. So how do you live in Canada nowadays in 2024 if you love your country? It's so difficult. There's so much things that don't adds up. Like you just cannot. It's weird.
Is there a division in Canada right now? I would say that the U.S. we're in our beginning of our political season for the year, which I'm not looking forward to at all because it's the only thing we're going to hear about for probably the next 10 months at a minimum. There's two camps, left and right. People, I think, often like to catastrophize like this is the end. It's never been this polarized. I'm never that sure about it. I'm trying to be an optimist, and I think we have the tools and the ability and empathy to actually make our way through. Is your country as divided as the U.S. seems right now? I'll be honest, I don't consume a lot of mainstream media anymore. So I don't hear a lot about what's going on north of the border. Just curious your guys' take.
I think it's a lot better. Like when we were having to show our papers, quite literally, to get into a restaurant, to get a haircut, to go to a movie, and you had to show your vaccine passport, which gutted me every time I did it. But I wanted to go with my girlfriend to go get dinner. And there's many times where I just felt kind of sick to my stomach having to do this because of stories like this, where I had bit the bullet and sort of in a cowardly way, you know what I mean, taken this thing that I didn't want to take. But again, I felt like so much pressure at the time, and there's no way I was going to give up all the things that I'd worked hard for a long time to get. But to answer your question, I think that divide has subsided quite a bit. I don't know what your guys' take is on it, but I don't see anywhere near as much, especially since they dropped all the showing your papers to get into.
What caused them to drop that? Was it pressure, social pressure?
Completely arbitrary, yeah. It was nothing backed by science. It never was.
So there's actually sworn affidavits in another case because we had a travel mandate. We were not allowed to leave Canada.
Oh, I know. For a long time, we couldn't get up. You guys are 60 miles from where we are right now.
So in the case that was brought for the travel mandate, there are sworn affidavits that show that the mandate was brought in because Justin Trudeau got heckled.
Are you serious?
Yep.
So it was his, what would be the right term, retribution for that? I got heckled, so this is what I'm going to do?
Yep, there are emails of them trying to justify the mandate.
How hard is it to get that information out to Canadian citizens?
I'm here in America.
Catherine, are you dying? Are you dying?
Yes.
I mean, I guess we're all dying. As soon as we are born, we're working our way there. All right.
It's the reason. One of the reasons I reached out to you is because there's not a whole lot of people, like I said, the divide is not there as much, but it's really a lot of let's just forget everything that happened and move on. Like we want to almost pretend that never happened. And in addition to, I'm not trying to make this about me at all. I just kind of want to stress a point here. After the back problems that I continue to be tested and investigated for, like this stuff has become a living nightmare, honestly, of pain management now. I've had what they think are palpitations. So now I'm being investigated continuously for heart potential complications that I'm moving into as well. Like it's just been an ongoing nightmare of specialist after specialist. And this is what led to my eventual medical release. But there's just, like I said, I'm talking to some of the world's best or some of Canada's top doctors in infectious disease personally that will say one thing to me on the record. Mm-hmm. And I say, this is a great conversation, man. Can I repeat this? Yes, but please don't say my name because of the implications and the consequences for my career. When I told him a couple weeks ago that, I don't think we've mentioned this yet, that it's, if I was, let's say I'm still in and I'm slated for deployment to Latvia next month or whatever, I still have to get a booster.
Really?
Yeah. Like, show me where that makes sense scientifically. If someone can provide me, anyone can provide me scientific evidence that I'll say healthy, but like once healthy, a guy, you know what I mean, with my level of athletic accomplishment and physique and all that stuff that, you know what I mean, would put me where I am now, assuming all things are equal and I'm not having these problems, like show me where I need a vaccine booster. And if that's the case, does every single senior officer that enforces this policy, are they on, what are we at now, 9, 10? So
boosters, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh,
like if we're following the chronology of every 6 months.
6, I think.
Yeah. So like, let's say we're anywhere from 5 to 10 shots deep. I want to know every single person has had every single booster that we're being mandated still to have because the science says so. I can almost guarantee that's not the case. So why are we doing this? Where is this going? what is the end game of this? I'm not sure. And you said something to me earlier, I can't remember if it was, I think it was today or yesterday, about what would happen if they did roll it back, and basically admitting that it never made any sense.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that?
So they still have the mandate in the Canadian Armed Forces.
Is it still the Moderna vaccine as well?
Yes, although they will sometimes allow you to have the Pfizer.
Okay. Why did they select the Moderna one?
I think this was what was on what the
Available?
government had bought.
Okay.
Yeah, and it might have had something to do with the cold storage. Remember back when this first started, they were rolling out vaccines. There was very special handling that had to be done.
I do remember hearing about that.
So I think it was that.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, Moderna had a subsidized factory in Canada right around that time being built.
You know, I do believe in forgiving people. I do believe in empathy and moving forward. But for the forgive and the forget through this structure of, and I have seen this, I've had these conversations with people who were literally die hard. If you don't get the vaccine, you are killing people. Oftentimes, I'm not going to use absolutes because I agree with you guys, 0 and 100 are the most inaccurate numbers, especially from a percentage perspective. But more often than not, what I will hear from that particular crowd when I push them on it is, let's just move forward. It's like, I'm not going to move forward until we address what happened previously. I'm willing to move forward, but the reason I'm not willing to move forward without addressing that is that we have to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Exactly.
And until, they can't just, let's just move. We don't want to live in the past. We don't live in the past, and I don't want to live in the past either, but I want our future to be shaped by educated decisions and choices, which needs to be informed by what happened in the past and the decisions that we made. Mm-hmm. I still wonder, you guys probably never saw this, and I don't know what happened to this guy, but they arrested a guy who was stand-up paddleboarding in Los Angeles on his own. Mm-hmm. I really hope that whatever ticket he got, he's been refunded for. Especially in the face of all this information, because the forgive and the forget people it's in the past. But not for that guy, not for these people who had these things happen to them. First, let's make atonement for what we did that was clearly incorrect, and then we can talk about what we're going to change our behavior with moving forward based off of the successes or failures or good decisions or poor decisions, however you would array it. But until that time, I don't have time for this. Let's just move forward and forget about what happened in the past.
A few months ago, the Conservative government in Canada tried to pass a legislation that was going to basically undo the mandate and say that it was something to that effect. I'm butchering this.
That there couldn't be another mandate.
Yeah, they shot that down right away. So that as another example of nobody wants to move on more than, myself and probably everybody. And part of that is exactly what you just said. Let's acknowledge where we should have pivoted or could have pivoted and start moving forward and own the mistakes that we made. I failed, certain tests, and I'm here because of those reasons. And it's and that's on me, And I have no problem saying that. But the people
the medical discharge likely though, again, I'm not a doctor, but listening to your story, we'll make a hypothesis or an assumption that in some way, shape, or form, your medical discharge is associated with the mandatory vaccines.
Nobody will put that on paper, by the way. Nobody.
Well, because I'm assuming, and I'm not a lawyer, but that means that there would be liability associated with that. And if you put that on paper, then you're going to have a breadcrumb right to you. And this isn't what makes you whole, but you being paid for what happened to you, which unfortunately, maybe he could get a Tesla too. You know what I'm saying, Fred? But that doesn't make your life any better. It doesn't change the medical issues that you may be having, but a government making that admission and then accepting the liability associated with that, man.
Now, the mass torts that we've brought about the abuse of power is using this whole thing that happened as an example, because it's how the chain of command implemented this. Mm-hmm. Because under the National Defense Act, the Chief of Defense Staff actually has the authority to order a vaccination. But if you reject the vaccination, you are charged, and then you must go to court-martial. They chose to not charge a single person under that section. They never charged anyone with not following a lawful order, because they couldn't risk going into a court-martial where the judge is going to decide under the law, was this legal?
Yeah.
But I have had some of my clients bring in grievances. Unfortunately, the final authority for a grievance is our Chief of Defense Staff, the same guy who issued the order.
So he'd be acting against his own best interest.
Apparently. Because it's been such a disaster, there is a committee, external review committee, that reviews all grievances before the final authority makes its decision and gives them advice. Every single person that has submitted a grievance regarding this mandate and being denied religious accommodation, denied medical accommodation, etc., every single one of them it's been identified that he breached their charter rights. And under the National Defense Act, the Chief of Defense Staff cannot issue an order that breaches charter rights.
Okay.
So he's caught because sitting on his desk is a pile that's getting bigger every day that says he was wrong. Just like the JAG told him he was wrong, the Chaplain General actually was more supportive of him than others, but the Surgeon General said, no, this can't be mandatory. So if he signs them and says, yes, he was wrong, I've got two mass torts of 458 people that are just waiting for him to admit he was wrong and issued an unlawful order.
What would best case scenario be for those 458 people were he to do so or you were to win the tort lawsuit?
I think it would be to win it because we're not just asking for money, we're asking for changes to the Canadian Armed Forces. One of them being he should never be the final authority for a decision that he made himself.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, this has never happened in the Canadian Forces before. They've never faced this type of lawsuit. They think they're untouchable. And if I accomplish nothing else, I want them to think for 2 seconds, if I issue this order, can I get sued for this?
When did people start reaching out to you?
October of 21, when
just
that
a
mandate
flood
came down.
Into your inbox?
Just thousands of them. And in the end, it was 458 that signed on.
When do you think you'll have resolution of some kind on this? What kind of timeline are we looking at?
Good question, because the Crown is playing games. No surprise there.
God, I wish I could say that about our country. That's just a cool sentence. Not that it's cool what they're doing, but like, yes, the Crown is playing games again.
Crown is playing games.
Game of Thrones.
I mean, I'd have to go back in time for that, or and I guess live in Fantasyland if the winter is coming and the dragons are going to be real. Yeah, so that'd be a combination of things. Maybe some smelling salts and a heater would help me with that, but
because the head of our military is the king. They swear an oath to the king, just like as a lawyer, I swear an oath to the king, not to the government, not to the people. Because the idea being that should the government turn on the people, the king should be able to turn the military or the courts onto the government and hold them to account. That's how it's set up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many other people do you think are out there that don't even know about the tort cases that you have?
Millions. Yeah. And lots of veterans. And I'm now putting together a class action on vaccine injured. Because Veterans Affairs is saying that it's not service related. Even though
it happened in the execution of their service or during that time period.
Yeah, and under an apparently lawful order. But they're on tight ground there because if they lose and admit that they're responsible for the injury and then we come out that it's an unlawful order, that just opens the whole other door.
Yeah.
It's really hard to get a physician to sign off on anything, even though all I have is sort of correlational and temporal association of what's happened with me compared to the timelines of when I was vaccinated. And again, I can't prove anything. I'm not even going to say that it was because of that. But when I went into physicians' offices early into me having all these issues and I was asking questions, the conversations I was having 2 years ago versus now are staggering with what they were not willing to say, afraid to say, or would only say to me behind a closed door and say, like, again, I'm not going to write this down, but like, here's what I think or whatever.
You might not be able to prove it directly for yourself at this point, but when you start finding a dozen people and 24 people, which becomes 100, which becomes 458, which becomes God knows. I mean, who knows? I mean, we're still what are we, 4 years maximum into the issuance of these initial vaccines anyway? And I remember hearing here in the U.S. them saying, you need to vaccinate small children. They're shown to have no long-term effects. Like, what study are you pointing at that shows that?
Of long-term data, yeah.
Yeah, long-term data that you just started giving this 6 months ago. What are you talking about?
Same with pregnant women. The Canadian Armed Forces has its own policy says you do not give any vaccine to a pregnant member, ever. None.
Yeah.
They were hunted down at home with men in uniform banging on their doors with paperwork, wanting them to be vaccinated. Some were charged with AWOL if their obstetrician put them in the hospital for complications. They were charged with AWOL. You're avoiding the vaccine. No, I'm having problems with my pregnancy.
At some point, the volume will become your proof, though. And I guess the point that I was getting to. You know, it gets to a point where you have this again, stack of paperwork that is no longer ignorable. And a good lesson in leadership for anybody listening, if you have fucked up, it doesn't get better with time.
No.
Hiding the fact that you made a mistake. Actually, you know what? It's not even – this is just life in general. This is one I've learned the hard way. You're better off accepting, admitting, and acknowledging anything that comes from making a bad decision than trying to cook it in the oven for a couple of years. I have never seen it work itself out better. But I have seen it be recoverable if people realize they make a mistake and they take action upon it and they course correct.
And that's exactly what they teach you as a junior officer or any junior member coming up through training.
It's like, this kind of decision-making 101. It's the OODA loop. I don't know if you guys teach that.
Yeah, we do. And you lead up and down the chain of command. So if you make a mistake as a junior officer in front of your platoon, the absolute first and best thing you can do is own that immediately.
Yeah.
Or you're going to lose.
Goes back to trust. If you don't own it, you just wrote a huge check, and it's going to be a withdrawal. I don't know what's in your account. You write a big check with a small amount in your account, you have a problem on your hand as a leader.
And the trust in the chain of command in the Canadian Armed Forces, all branches, is bankrupt. There is no trust. And if you have no trust, you don't have much of a military, and we don't have much of a military left anyway. The numbers I'm hearing are 21,000. We should have 100,000.
Total force?
21,000.
What was it in, say, 2018? Do you have any idea?
About 65.
This is where Michael, that lazy son of a bitch, taking today off would be helpful. Okay, that's still 3x, though.
Yep.
Okay. So if you're losing 2/3 of your military members in the course of a 6-year time period, you have a problem.
Yes, you do.
There's a number of reasons for that.
Yeah.
But the trust is definitely one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because now all these complications are getting out. People are starting to talk. They're now saying, well, it was an unlawful order. And you demanded that I follow an unlawful order. And when I said it's an unlawful order, you punished me for it. Or you punished that guy for it.
Yeah. The Canadian military is going to have they're going to have a rough road ahead regardless of what decision they make. They would be able to navigate their way out of it if they were open, honest, and transparent.
Yes.
The other path, I'm not so sure that will be the case.
Mm-hmm.
Can you quickly go over 410's situation and unpack that a little bit about his the lawsuit?
Well, General 410, so he was the guy that was in charge of the public rollout to the Canadian public for vaccines.
A general was?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he was one of the guys that got shuttled out for sexual misconduct when he said no to a mandate. After Trudeau had his hissy fit and said, I'm going to make them pay for...
Is that a technical term?
It is.
In Canada,
my world, it is. I speak military. I don't speak law.
Yeah.
But anyway, 410 says no. He's shuttled out. He faces criminal charges in the civilian court for something that apparently happened back when he was in Royal Military College as a cadet. Turned out to be completely false.
Okay.
He was showing up for his hearings in his uniform. And General Eyre then brought in a rule that if you were in a civilian situation, you're not allowed to wear your uniform because you're intimidating people.
Okay.
So that happens. He gets acquitted. He then turns around and sues the Canadian. He's still serving, by the way. Sues the Canadian Armed Forces for wrongful investigation, etc. They go into court, and General 410's lawyer stands up and says, they won't give me any documents to support my client's case. And the Crown stands up and says, well, there aren't any documents. We've looked. There aren't any documents. And General 410 is saying, I know there's documents because I wrote those emails, and I know, like, you're talking about me. And I know those cases are there. And the Crown turned around and quietly settled the case.
Interesting.
So then we get another general, General Whalen, who was head of human resources. He suddenly gets accused of sexual misconduct.
They really are on a broken record.
They really are. They really are.
It's the easiest way.
Yeah. So he goes
until it's not.
Yeah.
And so then he goes to court-martial. And because it's a court-martial, the JAG is doing it. The JAG prosecutor does their case. The criminal or the defense lawyer stands up and says, "We are calling General Eyre to the stand to testify." And the Crown then suddenly calls for a recess, and they settled his case. Withdrew the charges and settled the case because General Eyre didn't want to be on the stand.
And again, so I'm detached from this situation, live in a different country, operated under a different UCMJ, which I've been away from for over 10 years. Suing the U.S. military is not an option as a U.S. service member. Yeah. I think it's interesting that you could be active duty and sue the service for 410. Is he still in the military?
Yes, he is.
Oh, my God.
$6 million later.
Yeah.
It's a lot of Teslas, Frederick. Yeah. You could get the highest end and probably wrap it and get tinted windows.
We're planning a big party in Hawaii when we win.
Seriously. Okay. Wow. Sue the military that he's an active part of. Won $6 million. I would be worried about the trajectory of my career. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of a hot potato one. To me, when I hear that, so two notable people, high-ranking officers, and when the government or military is pressed, they fold. To me, that is a beacon.
Yep.
And I'm talking about from my own personality. If I were looking at that, like, okay, interesting. We get to this tipping point where they're going to have to shit or get off the pot, an American term that you guys can feel free to appropriate. Not even sure it came from America. But it's good. You get them to that point and they fold.
Yep.
To me, if I was looking at that and I was in that situation, that would be enough for me right there to be like, you know what? I'm putting my chips in on the table because if this is what I believe in and this is what I'm seeing and they're unwilling to have any level of transparency or integrity, like I'm going to go full back dive on those guys.
Well, and even on Twitter last week, our chief of defense staff, so our top general, our tough guy general, closed comments on X for his account because he didn't like the mean girl tweets. He was being offended by being criticized on X. I can't wait to cross-examine him, Andy. Because if he thinks my tweets are mean...
well, here's the thing. Would he even allow it or would they fold before then?
That's what I'm pushing. That the Crown is really working hard for me not to get to deposition.
I would love to see depositions.
Because the first person I'm going to call for depositions is General Trudeau.
Yeah.
And then General Fortin and General Vance
and
Admiral MacDonald.
Is the person that you are deposing, do they have the right to say, I need to take a break and just not come back?
No.
They can't end it?
I can actually compel them to.
Okay. So they get to stay in the room until you let them out of the room.
Right. Now, get this. When we get to the point where it's air, the plaintiff always has the right to be present during deposition. He's going to have to face 458 people while I grill him under oath. This is a man who can't handle mean girl tweets.
I mean, the internet can be unforgiving.
It can be.
It's also an amazing... I mean, memes are some of my favorite things.
I know.
For about 10 years, I thought it was meme. My children correct me. That's just being honest. Wow.
There's a lot of...
Anytime you try to silence voices, in my experience, and I don't know of a example in history where it's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's a form of censorship, essentially.
One of our independent media actually won the case that says that if you're a public official in Canada, you can't shut off your comments.
I think they did something like that in the U.S. where you can't block people for certain officials.
I have a summer law student coming to work with me here in a couple of weeks. Her first case is to sue General Eyre to make him turn his comments back on.
God, it's insane to me that
I warned him. Yeah. I told him not to do it.
Part of the reason, I'm not going to say this is a main reason, but the part of the reason that people are getting frustrated, and these are my friends that were colleagues that are close buddies of mine, motivated, disciplined guys that just want to do work. They're looking for work. They want to pass the torch on and continue training and all that stuff. Great friends. just beautiful humans in general, the level of wokeness that's going on a daily basis in the military in Canada is, I can't explain it. Like every 2 weeks you get an email of some other recognition of something, you know what I mean? That like, I don't understand what's going on here. Like, why do I need to be constantly told how much of a bigot I am and need to be retrained out of it before I deployed?
Also, and what does that have to do with your role in the military? I would say you guys north of the border are actually you seem to be a little bit ahead of us on the progressive train. Like,
we're way ahead.
Yeah.
well, we might have left the station at the same time, but you guys are shoveling coal onto it faster.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I don't know if people are paying attention to it because some of the shit is wild and completely off the rails.
Now, as an example of that, the one that we're being mocked for the worst is that in all federal government buildings, including on military bases, there must be feminine hygiene products in the male washroom for transgenders.
So accommodate the minority across the whole country, across bases for a minority.
Yeah.
So what do you think? You put your uniform on in the morning and you want to serve this country that goes backwards?
Yeah.
Most of the
People are just
military
scratching their heads all over the place.
And the wokeness has gone so far, and the recruitment crisis is so bad that right now in basic training in Canada is a person with Down syndrome and someone with cerebral palsy.
They need a lot of
They
people.
can't pass weapons training. They were told to pass them anyway.
I do not know how to make sense of that.
I can't either.
I mean, in the U.S., I've heard it said that it is harder to get into the military than it is an Ivy League school. And I actually wish it was harder than it currently is. I think there should be intelligence standards. I think there should be physical standards, capacity standards, maybe IQ and EQ.
They've actually taken away the aptitude test to get into the Canadian Armed Forces right now.
I mean, again, I've said this already and I say it often. I'm not an expert at anything. The military serves to defend your country. I mean, broadly, right? There's a lot more flowery words used by people way smarter than me to describe that. But if you're taking away from their ability to do the job they are created and designed and are supposed to deploy to do, for the sole and express reason of societal change or inclusivity for the sake of saying that you're inclusive, I don't think that ends well. And it doesn't surprise me that the Canadian forces are sitting at 21,000 versus 60. Even in the U.S., the last 10 years, every branch except for the Marine Corps consistently, and I think a few years the Army, has fallen short of their recruiting goals as well. And, there's a huge peak post 9/11 and, the narrative around the military changes, and I think a lot of that is the fault of the people who are responsible for educating what the military does and all these things. But if it gets on the wrong side of the social lexicon, then you start seeing those things. There's moral waivers that are allowed now in the military here in the U.S. Felons, I know of a few people who got in with felonies, which in my time they're like, how about no? Mm-hmm. Not only no, but hard no. We're not going to waive that stuff. But you run out of people. I have nothing against anybody born with those physical limitations. Cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, that it is what it is. But the battlefield doesn't care and doesn't respect that.
Exactly.
So in that particular occupation, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. The battlefield has to set the standard. And if you deviate from that in any way, shape, or form, you are undermining your country's and your nation's ability to protect itself. Mm-hmm. And I don't see how you can justify that.
Well, and the sniper troop for JTF2 was disbanded over this whole COVID thing.
Really?
Really.
Like, I thought it was just because Dallas is such an awesome guitar player. They're like, screw this, we're doing band camp now.
Yeah, no, it's because General Eyre hates the snipers. He didn't want them participating in the competition.
But what about when you need snipers?
Exactly.
It doesn't matter what you hate. It matters what you need.
In the fall of 22, we had 3 snipers to cover all of Western Canada. Now, our snipers are good, but they're not that good.
Yeah, I don't care how good you were. There's too much geography there.
Last May, on a Friday afternoon, there were 3 jets with 3 pilots that were able to take to the air to defend our country.
I mean, we got you guys, all right?
Well, I hope
you
so.
You guys are the 51st state, all right, in my mind. We got you guys.
Well, the joke always was, grab what you can, get to the mountains, and wait for the Americans to show up.
I mean, You guys are our allies. We're going to come up there and we're going to fuck some shit up if you guys need us to. But you shouldn't need us to is the problem.
Right. We
You know,
should
you
at
can't,
least
you
be
can't
able
use
to,
that as a, we don't need to do anything because somebody else is going to fill in the blank.
and we should be able to hold the line more than 2 hours. Like our chief of defense staff actually went on a public committee and said we have 3 days of ammunition left, and it'll take 2 years to replace it. And the head of our Navy goes into the public sphere and says, I can put one ship to sea right now.
What is going on in Canada?
It's rough. It's rough.
What do you think it'll take to change it?
There's still a lot of good people there that want to do good things, that are putting in the time, that are sort of digging in, hoping that this ebb and flow comes back, the pendulum swings, and we have less austerity, you know what I mean, in all the ways that we just mentioned. But this constant bombardment of wokeness, I've never met anyone in the military that gave a shit about what gender you were or what color of your skin was or what your background or like no one I've ever met. I'm sure they're there, you know what I mean? I'm sure they exist. I'm not saying they don't, but I've never met anyone. And all those guys just wanted people to do their job. If you did your job, it didn't matter where you came from, man, woman, you know what I mean? White, black, orange, green, like nobody cares. They just want to do work.
Would you say wokeness in Canada is still accelerating?
Yes.
I feel like we've gone past the tipping point in the U.S. I actually feel like people are kind of getting to the place where they've had enough of it.
I don't think we're going to see the end of peak woke until we get rid of Trudeau.
Yeah, we have to get rid of the Liberal government first.
But
the other problem is that we have bled so many experienced people out of the Canadian Armed Forces that even if we turned around and
can't replace the experience.
Yeah, if we did conscription tomorrow, who's going to train all those people? Because colonels and generals don't train people. It's the master corporals and the sergeants.
Yeah.
The train, and we've lost all those people with all that experience. And when this first started in the fall of 21, these people came. We're career people with clean records. Some of them had chests full of medals, which in Canada is almost impossible to get. The cream of the crop. And all they wanted was their career saved. And now they're all saying the same thing. I don't want anything to do with the Canadian military anymore.
That paints a bleak picture of national defense going forward.
Yeah.
What is the narrative in Canada for the origins of COVID?
Oh, have you heard about our Winnipeg lab scandal?
Do you mean when they flew the Ebola virus over to Wuhan?
And HIV?
That's the one. That's the one.
The Chinese
on
general?
A commercial flight?
Did you hear about the guy at the border that had a bunch of files in his trunk?
Tell me more.
Was fined $1,500 for not declaring contents?
No, I host another podcast called Change Agents, and I had talked with somebody who had deeply looked into the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Yeah, the WERV, whatever the fuck it is. People know what I'm talking about. And the Canada aspect was just a portion of it, because it's very clear that the U.S. did in fact fund gain-of-function research through the NIH, even though Fauci got up and said we absolutely do not. Of course, they did it through multiple cutouts, and the money didn't come directly through the NIH, which is a very common practice inside a government when they want to remove themselves from liability until they get caught.
Wouldn't know anything about that up in Canada.
Yeah. Well, in that interview, she was talking about live Ebola virus that, I mean, we had people from that institute come and train in the U.S. It's not like we were not involved with it as well.
Right.
But, yeah, Canada had I don't think it was a Yeti cooler, but in my mind, it was like a Yeti cooler full of the Ebola virus that they flew over there and gave to them.
There are emails that are in the public domain that they're talking back and forth, and they don't know, how do we ship this? How do we do it? They mailed it.
I heard it was on an Air Canada flight.
Yeah. But they also mailed samples back to Wuhan.
I told you to stay away from Air Canada.
I mean, not even on an Air Canada flight, but like straight up, they didn't charter the flight.
No.
It just carry on. No.
Yep.
Yeah.
In the overhead.
Look out for that northern border. We're dangerous right now. But yes, Canada, in my opinion, has our fingerprints all over.
So does the U.S.
Yep.
I mean, we legitimately trained some of their staff. We absolutely sent money. We were aware of the fact that they had containment issues. And again, I'm not going to claim to know where it came from. Can a reasonable person look at it and say this is extremely coincidental? Yes, and I'll leave it at that. Draw what conclusions you will. But, I mean, I don't know. What's it going to take to get rid of Trudeau? Let's just completely get banned from Canada. Let's see how the strategy is.
I got to go back.
Yeah, we all have to.
I feel like he's been elected for life.
I think he's doing his best to make it that way.
So the Liberal government knows that they're not going to get back in. It's very obvious the Conservatives are going to take, same as the Republicans here, will form the next government. What they're doing is they are absolutely destroying the country, maximum damage, and robbing the Treasury on their way out.
I mean, don't they still have to live in the country, or are these?
Well, so when they go to visit Ukraine with cash, briefcases full of cash, that's going somewhere elsewhere. I'm sure they've got.
Yeah.
There's billions of dollars that have gone missing from the Canadian government.
Well, the U.S. DOD hasn't been able to balance their budget for a good decade, or account for about 50% of their spending, so they're not alone.
Yeah. So, I think they're well set up for their retirement.
How much longer would you guys say Trudeau has in office?
He has to call an election by the third week of October in 2025.
Okay, so maybe it'll be like Q3, Q4 next year, and you think the likelihood of him being reelected is low?
Oh, unless there's a corrupted election, which we won't get into, he'll have to go.
Well, it's tough, right? When you're saying there's limited media outlets, they have ties to the government, so you're fighting that messaging. Where would you say the average Canadian who doesn't want to consume those particular media sources, what are they limited with? Because I don't know if you're aware of who Kelsey Sheeran is. I've had her on the podcast before. She was a Canadian soldier, and she had talked about, and I think I've heard it somewhere else as well, there's a information gap between like the U.S. and Canada. Limited information has the ability to cross the border, which I don't understand how they do that, but I'm also not necessarily technologically savvy. So where do Canadians get alternative media sources?
They're relying on social media. Thank God for Elon Musk and X, as far as I'm concerned. That's where I'm getting a lot of my information.
Yeah.
For now, until thought crimes are...
Yeah, well...
But like people...
My mean girl tweets to the CDS could get me put in prison for life.
Which is an insane concept.
Yeah.
Podcasts go a long way for folks who know, and again, I'm not an expert in anything either, obviously, but
like I host the podcast here in the U.S., I think. I upload to a service called Libsyn. I think it's based in the U.S. Does the Canadian government have the ability to throttle the delivery to Canadian citizens, though?
Yes.
I think that's coming.
Yes, they do.
And which is problematic, right? Because if you get your information from those sources, or you're looking from something alternate, and so if you don't want to consume their source, they'll just drastically limit the other sources that you can get.
Yeah, which they've basically done. And they're threatening to make it worse with the online harms effect.
Yeah.
When in history have the people censoring information been the good guys?
Oh, every time. You haven't seen it play out like that? Every single time. No, it's obviously I'm saying that in jest because the exact opposite of that is true. I can't think of an example, and I've asked many people this. Just give me an example of when censorship had a net positive benefit. And I have yet to get a response to that. And maybe there is one. And somebody, please feel free to point it out to me because I've yet to get a positive response to that question. Mm-hmm. How's old? You mentioned Jordan Peterson earlier. Is he doing okay? Seems to be a little bit quieter. I don't know. Maybe they're throttling him.
He's doing a tour right now. So
okay.
Less active. Although he shows up on X, and I love his tour because he roasts Justin Trudeau something terrible, as well as our other ministers. The other thing to understand for your American audience is that our prime minister is not elected. Our prime minister is a member of it doesn't even have to be a member of parliament. All he has to be is the leader of the party that wins the most seats.
Okay. Interesting.
So Justin Trudeau could be removed as prime minister tomorrow if the Liberal Party tossed him and put in a new leader.
I didn't realize that.
The problem they've got is that who's in the senior cabinet that might be his replacement is just as bad as him. I'll give you an example. Anita Anand was Minister of Defense when all this mandate stuff kicked off. When I brought the lawsuit, they shifted her over to the Treasury Board because the Treasury Board holds complete control over all our access to information requests. So they were trying to shut down people being able to get evidence. What they didn't know is that for 2 years, we went deep and we went dark. I said to my clients, nobody talk about it, and let's start A-tipping. And I had people from all over the country. Not one request came from my office. And in the end, we have 300,000 pages of evidence that they didn't plan on us having, which caused which caused grief to the Crown lawyer when he received my list of documents.
I feel like a day of reckoning is coming for some portions of the Canadian government.
There needs to be. Honestly, Canada is what happened in Brazil could very easily happen in Canada tomorrow.
I mean, I have my own. It's easy to sit here and, literally, you guys are 60 miles north. I mean, the U.S. government is flawed in its own ways as well. There's a deep level of personal opinion, no direct data to support this, just based on my own, watching the world around me. A pretty deep level of corruption, it would appear to be. People wanting to be in those positions, not to serve those that elected them into office, but them themselves. And I don't think it was ever meant to be a career. Not that I knew any of the founding fathers, but we have some house cleaning to do on our side of the house. I hope one of the things about the woke movement, and I'm not trying to use that term pejoratively, I'm just trying to describe what I think most people would recognize as that movement, is I think sometimes like the benefit of it is some people think it's utterly ridiculous. Some people think it's the most important battle of their lifetime, and you can land wherever people want to land. I think at some point in time, the unintended consequence is that it gets people off the bench that would normally not participate. And then I think that change is possible if you can do that. The silent majority that just wants to be left alone and live their life, well, at some point in time when they're needled enough, step in and make the changes that are necessary. So I try to be hopeful. I think we can figure this stuff out.
We're starting to see that in Canada with parents taking back control of what's happening with their children in the schools.
Yeah.
But then just this past week in Ontario, a judge has given the Ontario government an order to pay for some person who was born male to come down to Texas and have a surgery so that he can have both a penis and a vagina.
Why is that a government issue?
Exactly, but they said because he doesn't identify, or I guess it should be they, don't identify as either sex, that they should be allowed to have this surgery and it should be paid for by the Canadian people because we have government health care.
Yeah. How are the pronouns in Canada? Are they still preferred, or are they no longer?
No, the Ontario court just came down with a rule that you have to, when I stand up in court and introduce myself, if I was in Ontario, I would now have to give my pronouns.
So they're compelling speech from you?
Yeah. But when I was in federal court in February, same thing. I had to give them they would not take no for an answer. I had to give them my pronouns.
What about the usage of somebody else's preferred pronouns?
You're still compelled. That's what got Jordan Peterson in trouble with some of the stuff. Yeah, that's what started his whole career, basically, in the public speaking realm.
How is he largely viewed in Canada? I mean, obviously, it probably depends on who you ask, but
I think you're getting a biased sample here. But I've read most of his books, and I agree with a lot of the things that he says.
Yeah.
I wish sometimes he would not tweet some of the things that he does. You know what I mean? I like the jabs, but I like some of his jabs, and I think he's brilliant. I think he's well intentioned. Part of me wishes he would run for office. I don't think he'd survive physically, but
I don't think he would either. Yeah,
but I think he means well, and he's obviously articulate. He's obviously brilliant,
and he's an Albertan.
Well, I also think
we're rabble rousers out there.
I think we need people that are that intelligent and that willing to. I mean, he put a lot at risk. You know. Obviously, his career went on an Elon Musk trajectory, rocket. It could have gone in the other direction, a submarine, Red October rocket, I guess it would have been. But yeah, I like some of the stuff he says. I don't agree 100% with anybody, to include myself. I think and say things. I'm like, you are an idiot. Why are you thinking that? I'm like, I don't know. These are the conversations I have with myself. So if I can't rely on myself 100% of the time on the way that I think and speak, why would I think that somebody else can be perfect? That's the one thing that I wish people would remember. It's okay to, you could have two people on both sides of the aisle. You can actually generally find something endearing about both of those people, but it seems like we live in a world now where it's like all this or all this, and nobody live in this middle space. And I feel like on almost every issue I land in the middle.
I feel most people do.
I think they do as well. They just don't do it on the internet because the middle ground on the internet is boring. So
exactly.
You have to go to this. It's like, hey guys, just being a reasonable person, having a reasonable day. Like boring, no likes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't trend on TikTok.
I wouldn't know because I don't have TikTok.
Me neither. But this is what I've been
told. Are you guys allowed to have it?
Yes.
We're supposed to ban it in Montana, and I'm not sure how that works.
TikTok's Chinese. Everything Chinese is approved in Canada right now.
We are becoming China.
Well, we are. I think they're our number 2 trade partner here in the U.S. as well. It's not. It's it's like, come on. I mean,
well, there's a huge election interference commission going on right now in Canada that shows that they interfered in our federal elections in 2019 and 2021.
What surprises me is that surprises people.
Yeah, I know.
This is, this is a battlefield, or can be a battlefield, the electoral, and you know this because you worked in the space. People, I cannot believe that the Chinese government would do something to us online. And my first question to them is, do you think that our own government is not doing that to other people? Not trying to justify, but let's take a broader context of the world that we live in. A national state actor has a new tool, they're going to use it. Guess what we are doing too as a country? We probably are doing the same thing. Maybe not in China back to them, but I bet you we're doing it somewhere else. So not that it makes it okay, but we're all far less pristine than I think most people would want to believe.
I think that's reasonable and rational.
Yeah, so boring. People are like, no likes.
yeah. Sorry, folks.
Brian, what else have we left off, man?
I did want to give a shout out to a good buddy of mine, Aaron. He runs a really important program through the Toronto Police Service. So he's an ex-service member, special forces guy who got out, went civvy-side policing, and developed a program called the Military Veteran Wellness Program. I just want to read a little bit of copy here, if that's okay, because I don't want to leave anything out, but I'd want to do this justice. So
what do you got there? An iPhone 3?
And my buddies are going to love that. I get so many trips for this. So the MVWP training program is available free of charge on the Canadian Police Knowledge Network, CPKN. It provides an understanding about military culture, challenges, transitioning to civilian life, mental and physical barriers. It also addresses how a veteran may begin having suicidal ideations or living in a situation they do not have a home and in a situation where they do not have a home and experience crisis. The MVWP is a complete program which provides de-escalation training specific to a veteran in crisis, information about the National Veteran Social Services and the mechanisms to make a timely referral. So Aaron is now with his colleague Jeremy, who I just met the other day. They are rolling this out internationally, traveling all over the U.S., all over the world, meeting with partner law enforcement agencies who are now taking this on. It's been rolled out in at least one other country, Australia. I know the U.S. is heavily involved in this, and he travels all over liaising with people to get training for police on the ground, responding to these veterans in crisis, teaching them how to handle a veteran who's dealing with any of the things that you've experienced, I've experienced, Fred's experienced, and everything in between, and trying to get them help to prevent them from becoming a statistic. And there's dozens of success stories of this program, and I think it's absolutely phenomenal. Aaron's done a great job, and Jeremy, and they deserve a lot of support and praise for what they're doing. I'm really proud of those guys.
Awesome. Catherine, how can people get in touch with you or learn more about the tort cases that you have? Because I feel like there has to be people out there who you are not made aware of yet.
Right.
How would they get in touch with you? How would they track, or even just if people who are curious or interested, how can they follow what you're doing?
So our Twitter handle is @Valour Legal, and Valour is spelled Canadian way, Valour.
Valour.
Valour. I get Valour all the time. It's a Valour. And also, so all these lawsuits are being done by a nonprofit. So I don't charge legal fees to bring these cases. So the nonprofit brings cases relating to CAF. For example, we have another case where a 23-year-old veteran was offered medical assistance in dying when he reached out for mental health support from the back.
What?
Yeah. And this happened to several people, and some have accepted the offer. So
I read an article recently. I didn't realize that Canada allowed the medical or the choosing to end your life.
It's one of the leading causes of death in Canada right now, and it's made us the number one country in the world for organ transplants.
Oh, there's a whole tinfoil hat on the paper, filing cabinet there.
Yeah, in the paperwork for MAID is a paragraph where you agree that your organs will be donated.
You have to agree to that?
Yes.
I don't know how I feel about that. I do feel I am glad that people have a humane. Again, any tool. Tools have their designed purpose. They can be used improperly. I watched my own mother suffer through cancer twice. The second time ended up taking her life well over a decade ago. But not that she would have made that choice, but I would have understood it if she did make that choice. I actually heard about the Canadian program, Jim Shockey, incredible outdoorsman and husband. His wife made that choice, and I read an article about it, and it's what kind of led me down the rabbit hole. I could see it being improperly used, which sucks, but I do appreciate that they have that option.
Right. Yeah. But it shouldn't be the first thing that a 23-year-old healthy veteran is offered when he calls back and says, I am not doing well, I need mental health help.
I don't know if it should be on the plate to ever be offered to that person in the first call.
I mean, veterans are a very vulnerable population. Add into it, they now have told active service members that if they choose MAID, their death will be treated like a combat death.
What?
So their family will be taken care of. Their funeral they'll get the military funeral. They'll get the whole thing. So those are the type of cases besides the mass tort.
That's a really weird way to phrase that.
Isn't it, though?
To position that program. Yeah, I don't understand the motivation behind that at all.
Lots of people have lots of theories that a dead veteran's cheaper than a live one.
I guess over a long enough timeline, I guess that would be true.
Yeah, there's been articles in the mainstream media about our healthcare system. It would save our healthcare system millions if people chose MAID instead of healthcare.
Wow.
So anyway, that is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
But so it's Valour Legal Action Center.
Okay.
And center, again, spelled Canadian RE instead of ER.
Centre.
Yeah. So the Valour
yeah.
Legal Action Center.org is the nonprofit that does all these cases.
And again, best case scenario for you, what do you think would be a hopeful timeline to get some more further action on this from the?
I would like to see the Crown admit defeat, and within the next 6 months, we've got a settlement done.
Okay, that would be amazing.
If these people don't need to be dragged through the mud, they don't. There's 458 people that have put their lives onto sworn documents, told stories just like Fred's that, and the vaccine injury stories coming in now are horrific. I've got estates. COVID vaccines have killed more Canadian Armed Service members than COVID did.
I don't think we've seen the end of those. And again, how this is a tough one where, the malice versus incompetence. I do truly believe that people that they wanted to make a difference. I also do truly believe that some people wanted to make money.
Absolutely.
And I think those people could probably exist in the same government institutions, in the same medical institution. Big pharma is a huge thing. I mean, they don't only the U.S. and New Zealand. You guys don't advertise for pharmaceuticals in Canada, do you?
Oh, yes, we do. I get to listen to those commercials on the radio every morning.
It's because you guys are like the top hat of America. So you guys are just in. You're 51st state. Yeah. How fucked up is it that you can – we're the only two countries, New Zealand and the U.S. and apparently Canada. Maybe they mean North America when they say that. But nobody else allows for that. I wonder why.
That's a good question.
But here we are, leading the charge.
Yep.
Watch any public TV show here in the U.S. and you will be bombarded with everything from headaches to dick pills. You can solve all problems. Not in one pill, though, so you're going to have to go into the doctor.
I saw a commercial last night. You can plug in something from a pharmaceutical company to help your cat calm down.
The key to that is don't ever own a cat, all right? I
True.
like dogs. I don't trust cats. They'll eat your eyeballs if you die.
Yes, they will.
Real quick. Real quick. Oh, man. Yeah, the vaccine injuries, I don't think we've seen the end of those for a long time.
Well, myocarditis can be a death sentence.
Yeah.
Within 5 to 10 years. So we haven't even begun to see the damage. And the worst hit are our most fit. JTF2, CSOR, which is our search and rescue, and our pilots. Those are the guys who are dropping dead in their sleep.
And again, one data point doesn't necessarily, right, tough to make proof, but you get this volume of data and it becomes undeniable. Getting somebody to admit the undeniable, a different story. Thankfully, there are people like you out there that can kind of compel them and force them to do so. But then there's the additional step of how do you make amends for that?
Right.
Money doesn't bring life back. Fred, what are your plans? Are you going to develop an Uber empire?
No, I've done actually doing some Uber. I lost my job 2 weeks ago because I told my boss I needed 3 days off to do this podcast, and he didn't really like it. Got fired. Before
your Uber job?
No, not my Uber job, another job. But
What's this guy's name and website so I could give him some feedback?
I'm no longer doing Uber, actually. I'm planning to start my own business.
What are you going to do?
My girlfriend is having her own business of cleaning Airbnbs, basically.
Yep.
And I'm going to be cleaning windows.
Okay.
That's easy. I got all the customers already.
My middle son has a window cleaning business, and he kills it. Just more cash than he knows what to do with. He's 18 and wildly irresponsible with it, and I completely support it.
It will change. He will get some
Of course.
maturity eventually.
Yeah, but you know what? He's got to make some mistakes along the way. As long as they're not catastrophic and as long as they're not in my truck, I'm okay with it.
Exactly.
That's cool. You going to stay up in Canada? You going to move around a bit? Where are you going to call home?
I will stay in Quebec for now, but I'm willing to change because I don't like this province anymore.
Yeah.
Too much taxes. People are too much divided. They just speak French. They don't inform themselves somewhere else.
Yeah.
And other news media. So maybe I might move in Alberta one day because I've lived there 1 year as while working, being posted at CFP in Moncton, and I love the city, especially the Canadian Rockies. Love it.
Cool. Yeah. Have we left anything out? Do you guys want to leave the audience with anything else? Final thoughts, closing thoughts, anything else you want to talk about?
I don't think so. I think we hit everything. I just want to say thanks again for letting us come out. This has been really important. It's really hard to get this message out.
I'll be honest, I hadn't heard
on a wide platform.
I knew that Canada was a little bit more gas pedal on certain things. And I was just watching, I don't know where I saw it, but Bill Maher was just talking about some statistics. 3.1% unemployment rate in the U.S. right now, over 6% in Canada. 14 of the 15 dirtiest cities or air population lowest scores are in Canada. One of them is in the U.S. And people often in the U.S. point to Canada. National healthcare system, progressive, and he was essentially saying, hey, if you want to pay attention to what happens if you gas pedal this too much, the test results are out.
Yeah.
So you can make a corrective action before we get to that point. And again, I'm not trying to sway anybody's opinion, but it's interesting to dig into this from people who are living it firsthand. It's not something that you commonly hear here in the U.S.
The Canada that exists today is not the Canada that I knew and grew up in and was so proud of.
Do you think it's recoverable?
I hope so. I hope with the new government that's willing to open up our natural resources again and get rid of some of our debt. We have so much national debt. It will take generations.
Welcome to the club.
I know. It will take generations to fix. But we have the natural resources sitting there that would actually pay off that debt. And
who owns most of Canada's debt? Do you guys know? Because I think China owns most of the U.S.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Fuckers.
Yeah. I saw them doing that in the Caribbean when I lived there in the 90s. They would come in and finance all this stuff for those little governments, and then they controlled everything.
Yeah.
But I think that's for the federal government. As for the Canadian Armed Forces, I think it needs to be reduced to the ashes. It's very close. Reduce it and rebuild. It has to be rebuilt right from the start. We need to withdraw from NATO because we can't meet those obligations at all. And until we have a military that can actually contribute, I think that's where our military is right now. Air's retiring in August. I don't know who they're going to put in, but I think they're going to put in someone to be a fall guy or fall woman for the disaster.
Which is unfortunate because they'd be taking over after all those things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, took place. Also, a far too common narrative.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's get you out of here. Go enjoy Montana.
Thank you very much.
All right. Yeah, thank you.